Hey guys, been a while. Sorry about that. January was a washout due to health issues. It's good to see everyone back. Again, anything that was posted before it started, I don't see everything. Anything before chat is now open to everyone. Anything before Rocket Maths question about a Super Keeley or comment about a Super Keeley, and we'll get to that. Anything before that I've missed due to the way the software works, copy and paste. I don't want to ignore you. I'll start with Ramalama Ding Dong. Thank you very much. Why might an AC30 custom head sound better than a custom classic version? Does the comparison differ after your mods for tone or reliability? Well, after the mods, they're going to be just about the same as far as tone. They're going to be almost the same as far as reliability, though the AC30 custom, the custom series in general, the 15 and the 30, not the 10, not the 4, is better built in terms of the quality of the boards than they use in the custom classic series. The main difference is, first of all, there are more things that I need to change in the custom classic to make it reliable, and due to the way they use some lead-free turret things that are actually mounted on PCB, where it's really tricky to get all the lead-free stuff out so you can get a good solder joint without overheating it so much that the turret lifts off the pad. The custom classic takes a lot of work. Second of all, the grill cloth on the custom classics is real shiny and fake looking because that was when they first had to change over to the new EU regulations that the grill cloth could not be flammable, or if you're in the UK, inflammable. So the old cotton cloth was a fire risk, or so the EU thought, so they had to change over, and so the new grill cloth that they used on the custom classic was a synthetic that looks very synthetic. The custom cloth is a new actual cloth, which meets all the fire regulations, apparently, looks a lot better. And also the color on the panel on the custom classic series, they only got right for a brief period of time. There's a lot of them that are very orange, a lot of them that are very magenta, lipstick kind of looking. And on the custom, they just went with that nice dark color and doesn't have any weird variation. I think it's a better looking amp, and it's a better built amp. It is a bit heavier due to the cabinet change. But once they're modded, they can both sound fantastic. Let's see here. All right, Rocket Maths. He just upgraded a Super Keeley to a 68 Super Reverb, except suddenly no reverb. Getting signal from output, what would I check in my experience? I don't know what's involved in a Super Keeley and what would need to be changed to make it a Super Reverb. Oh, I don't think you made mods to the Supro. I think you just got rid of the Supro and got a Super 68 Super Reverb. All right, so no reverb in a reverb amp. You're getting signal from output. Do you mean the output of the tank? In which case, it's probably most likely a bad 12AX7 driver tube. I'm sorry, 12AT7 driver tube. It could also be a bad transformer, or it could be a faulty wire, or a bad tank. It is not sacrilege to replace the original tank. I see your follow-up there. If the original tank is bad, get a different one. Of the tanks on the market today, the Mojotone medium decay sounds the most like the old long decay that Accutronics and Gibbs made in the 60s for Fender. And if you can't get the Mojotone, then the MOD series that you can get everywhere. They also have a medium decay. I think Ruby and Tube Amp Doctor might have a medium decay as well. But the current production medium decays sound more like the 60s long decays. Jorge, hello. Thoughts on the Fender Custom 57 5E3 is expensive, but is it worth it? Design, components, or is it meh? It's not meh. It's not that well built. It's certainly not as well built as the old ones. But if you want a 5E3, there are so many other companies that will do a better job, often for less money. Victoria comes to mind. There's a couple of others that I can't recall off the top of my head, but there are a lot of good options out there for a 5E3 build, and I think Fender Customs should be way down on the list. Chris R. Hey, Lyle. Hi, Lyle. Hi, Chris. Ever think of doing a basics videos like repairing a Fender 2-button switch or proper way to replace a soldered speaker, making speaker cables, common stuff we can do at home? Thanks. I have thought about it, and then when I looked, there's an awful lot of stuff on YouTube that already shows that and often shows it well. And it's just a matter of time and to some degree interest on my part, but mostly time. I've been really furiously trying to play catch up on a lot of stuff. It's a continuing state of being playing catch up. And, I do show things like that within the scope of a larger repair fairly often, but I've not done a dedicated video on it. And there's several good videos on those kinds of things already out there. So I'm not trying to be all things to all people. Hey, Jacob, you're very welcome for the videos. He noticed a 68 twin reissue does not have a capacitor on the bias spot. Would I recommend adding one like I do on the deluxe amps? What value cap? Well, you can add one if you feel that if you notice a change. So if you have a low-level hum and putting a cap there makes that low-level hum go away, then yeah, it was a great thing to do. You would typically want to use a 10 microfarad or a 22 microfarad cap, and I use a 63 volt. You can also use a 100 volt. Given that you're going to have, potentially up to negative 55 volts there on the bias spot, you don't want to use a 50 volt cap or lower. In fact, if you can get the 100 volt, have that little margin of safety. I use the 63 volt on that because I know that voltage is not going to exceed that. It gets confusing talking about high negative voltages, but it's a thing. For instance, on Yeatsy Guitar's channel this morning, he was opening up a 60 or 61 Concert or Super, one of the brown panel harmonic trim models, great amp, and the stock capacitor in the bias circuit was a 10 microfarad 50 volt. Now 10 microfarad was they were out of what they normally used, so they grabbed that, or they grabbed the wrong one by mistake in 1960-61, because that should have been 50 microfarad from the factory. But more worryingly, Fender often used a 50 volt cap there, even though the negative voltage at that point could be negative 55, negative 57 volts. So those caps can often fail from that reason. Same way I've seen a bunch of 25 volt caps in the bias circuit on old Princetons. It's amazing that they didn't just blow up. Sometimes they do. Wrong button, sorry. Haven't done this in about a month, or a month and a half, I guess, so I'm a little bit out of practice on this. JB, he's considering a U63 Vibroverb 2x10 reissue. Thoughts? What speakers would be recommended upgrade? Well, like all the reissue Fenders, the stock filter caps are usually pretty crappy in those. The small value electrolytics are usually okay, but all the filter caps are those IC brands, the gray ones, and sometimes blue ones, or sometimes you'll find Leland's, Leland, but expect to replace those. And, check, like with all the reissues, that all the solder joints on the jacks and pots and switches are good. And beyond that, they're pretty good amps. For speakers, it's kind of like asking what kind of ice cream someone should like, but it's hard to go wrong with the Warehouse the G10C, which is their 10-inch version of a Jensen C12N. But, other guys are going to want more of an Alnico thing with more compression, less output. Other guys are going to want a smoother sound. Other guys are going to want a glassier sound. So I would say that no one's going to hear a Vibroverb reissue with, I'm sure it's not a Vibrolux because the Vibroverb should have a 15. But anyway, the 2x10, no one's going to hear a pair of G10Cs and say, that's awful. It may not be their ideal, but they're going to say, that is one particular really good sound. And Otto, I have not forgotten to check for your email from Keith's video the other day. I will do that. I've been really busy, but it is in the back of my mind. And he's watching Bathurst. I assume that's some form of football. Let's see. Good to see everyone here who's saying nice And good morning, Victor. Let's see. T777, his 57 custom champ reissue is in the shop. Okay. He wants another touch-sensitive amp that's not loud. He tried a Princeton reissue with 12-inch, too scooped and distant for him. That's really difficult to say what you're going to like because there are so many different amps out there at different price points for different tastes. I don't know whether you're looking for touch-sensitive clean but not scooped or touch-sensitive distorted. And I don't know what your budget is. I could say, go get a Swart. Well, that's great, but it's a $1,600 amp, and you are thinking more of a $600 amp. Typically, though, a Princeton reissue with a 12-inch speaker is one of the least scooped of the 60s era Fenders that they made. It's got quite a bit of prominent mids, not as much as a Champ, but if your ears are tuned to a Champ, which is a fairly boxy, mid-rangey sound, then yeah, Princeton or a Deluxe is going to sound very scooped in comparison. But in the context of music, the mids that are there typically come through really, really well. Hey, K. Michael P., I still know nothing about Marshall. That is true. Bobby Childers asking about me doing a soldering video. I probably will do that, as I mentioned earlier. I'll probably do that in the context of some other video just as it comes up. But I don't know that maybe I'll do a video just on that just to get the clicks. But it seems that that's content that's already out there. I'm far from the only other person who knows how to. I'm far from being the only person who knows how to solder or how to properly connect a speaker or properly make a cable connection. So I don't want this to be that I have to. I feel I have to cover everything just so that I can be the authority on that. If Uncle Doug's done it, if Colleen's done it, it's been done very well. The bulk of my videos aren't because I'm setting out to show something specifically. It's because I have a repair on the bench. Like I've got this Moog, I'm changing the power cable out. I don't know what I'll find when I get inside. That'll be fun for us all to go along. But I didn't think, I need to show how to change a power cable. Let me find a Moog, you know? RPM asks if I would ever consider doing a how-to video with the relevant disclaimers on improving on Fender's slightly messed up approach on amp design. Well, I think that's a pretty open-ended question, and it's open to interpretation. I would say that to a large degree, I think I've already done that on many of my Fender reissue videos where I've shown what the factory state is and where you can make improvements and why those improvements are improvements rather than mojo enhancements. And on the old amps, specifically the 70s amps, where I make things more like the 60s amps, again, there's that through line of just things to make it better, and here's why that is. But I don't know that I need to do a how to change a Fender's design, because the people who would need that video probably don't need to be messing with an amp, not at that level. And the people who are qualified to mess with an amp at that level probably don't need my advice. Let's see. Good morning, everyone. Brad, I'm glad it was on your end. No offense. Let's see. New York City Geology. I would not recommend anything that Super has made since about 1970. Alan Dozvan is joining us from Croatia. Thank you for joining us. It amazes me and delights me that people come here from all over the world, because I am a would-be world traveler with a stay-at-home budget for the most part. So if I can't get everywhere that I'd like to get in some way, I feel that parts of the world are coming to me, and that's a wonderful feeling. Nikki and I may be doing a very, very, very budget trip to London and Oxford later this year. She's probably going to be attending / speaking at a conference in Oxford for 2 days. and she would obviously need an interpreter. So we are thinking, well, you know, we can stay outside the city center and get anywhere we want and stay pretty cheap. And you can eat cheap in London if you choose to, and we could splurge on some really good curries and stuff. But you know, we won't be staying at the Savoy. Anyway, I went off on a tangent. You know, it's Saturday. Saturday here. It's Sunday where some of you guys are. Otto, if the Studio Vintage, the Marshall Studio Vintage, if it was half the price as it is in Europe and came with a 12, it would be a somewhat better amp, a somewhat more justifiable amp. I'm still not sure that it would be anywhere preferable to the DSL 40C and CR, which have more features and are just as approximately a Marshall as a Studio Vintage. It's just that in the price range of that Studio Vintage, you could get a number of Friedmans which sound awesome. So I just don't see, especially in the United States, at the U.S. prices, any justification for the Studio Vintage. Thanks for putting the tank link there, Brad. Hey, Gringo Pig. Seth B is talking about old reverb tanks. The the folded line tanks are my favorites. They're not the best sounding, but they're made exclusively by beautiful girls in air-conditioned factories. It says so on the tin. All right, 1217 Productions is taking out the tone suck capacitor resistor thing, the T filter in an old Gibson. You know, those T filters do suck a lot of gain and take all the joy out of Mudville. It's got a 1 nanofarad cap before it. Some schematics without it have a 0.02 and a 0.033 audible difference. Yeah, the larger the cap, the more low end. But unless you know what the resistance to ground after that cap is, it's anyone's guess. So what you need to do is, if it's just going to be, say, that capacitor with then one resistor going to ground, one total resistance to ground at that point before the grid of the next stage, then you can pretty much get away with doing a simple RC filter calculator. You can look those up online where you can say, all right, if it's a 470K resistor and it's got a 1 nanofarad cap, 0.001, that's going to be at, say, 327 hertz, and 22 nanofarad 0.022 would be at, like 30 hertz. So you can get an idea of how extreme the change would be. But yeah, it will be an audible difference between a 0.001 and a 0.033. That would be 330% increase in lows. That's not quite how that math works. It's a lot more low end with a 0.033. And the other thing, if you don't want to do the math, you can just say, all right, I know that I've got 5 caps here. Let me try each one. That's the one I like the sound of, and that's fine too. DB, if your 2010 Blues Deluxe reissue, I love that it's a reissue of an amp that's not that old. It's not a reissue of anything. It's just a different later version of the Blues Deluxe. He's having issues, no amp text around here. Should I just throw it on the bonfire? Well, you don't need to. If you just play it, it'll catch on fire itself. I'm sorry to make a joke at your expense. I don't mean it in the way it sounds, but yeah, those are terribly, notoriously flammable amps. They burn themselves up. The input jack solder joints break. The pot solder joints break. They to keep working, they really need a tech, and the filter caps like to leak. So if it's too expensive, I mean, it's a pretty big amp, and if the cost of shipping it or driving somewhere plus a repair, that could easily add up to $500 or so, you might be better off getting a different amp than keeping that one on life support. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of realistic news. Hey, Thomas. I don't have a video showing all the mods I recommend for Blues Junior. I don't think. I've done many videos on Blues Juniors, and I've kind of shown them as I went, but I don't have a how-to video. I tend not to make how-to videos because, again, I don't want people seeing one video and thinking that therefore they can do all the work necessary in an amp, because especially in PCB amp like a Blues Junior, that's a recipe for a damaged PCB and then an amp that can't be fixed without spending tons and tons of money. I don't recommend Blues Juniors. I recommend avoiding them, but if you do have one, sometimes it is cost effective to fix, and sometimes it can even be fixed. Brad's Guitar Garage here sells a replacement PCB for the output board, which is the most common point of drastic failure on those, where the tube sockets just desolder themselves and burn the traces beyond all recovery. I will not be working on any more Blues Juniors myself, save for one that's still here, where I'm in fact putting one of Brad's boards in, at which point I will no longer be working on Blues Juniors because there are more interesting amps out there demanding my time. Hey, Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Does a speaker's wattage rating really need to be roughly double an amp's wattage, like the consensus on the internet needs to say? No, it does not. An AC30 is a 33 to 40 watt amp, depending on how it's pushed and how it's biased, and it comes stock from the factory with two speakers, which, traditionally the Celestion Blues that are rated for 15 watts each. They're a little bit closer to 20. That 15 is a conservative rating. But you've got a 33 to 40 watt amp with 40 watt speakers in it. Or you put a Celestion Blue, which is a 15, let's call it a 20 watt amp, and a deluxe reverb. It can last for decades, and that's a 22 watt amp when it's clean. The AC15 is putting out 15 to 18 watts typically into a same 15 to 20 watt speaker. The thing is, when you do that, you're running the risk that at some point that speaker will fail, and you will need to spend money on to replace that. And when that speaker fails, if it fails drastically, suddenly, and then there's no load, you could damage the amp, you could damage the tubes. But a lot of guys love the sound of Celestion Blues in Voxes or with the deluxe reverb, etc. Or they like the sound of a 20 watt Alnico speaker in a 15 watt, 20 watt old Fender amp, and they run that risk because they think that it gives them a tonal benefit. Now that's something that I want people to make an informed decision about, and a deluxe reverb, which is a 22 watt amp clean, also sounds fantastic through a 60 or 70 watt speaker. It's going to have a lot more headroom, and those larger speakers tend to be more efficient, which means that they're louder with the same input signal. So what's a better tone for you is wholly subjective. Just know that if you're getting a speaker whose wattage handling is near or just barely above the rated output of the amp you're going to use it with, make sure you know that you are making a calculated risk to achieve a certain result. And, it's not something I would recommend most people doing, but if you're making an informed decision, and you know how to recognize the sound of a speaker that's beginning to give up the ghost, it can be a good risk. Now, once I forgot and I hooked a 100 watt Marshall up to a 2x12 loaded with greenbacks because I forgot. This was some years ago, and there was no warning. So all of a sudden, they just went poof. But fortunately, the amp, its HT fuse blew at the same time, so. They didn't go poof, actually. They made a much more horrible sound, but I'm not going to emulate it here. That is a Bloody Moog Prodigy back there. I'll blow you down off camera. We got to keep our family rating here. We don't want to get us demonetized. All right, Fender Deluxe Reverb R69 22 ohm flameproof. In one video, I say 470 ohm as Leo intended. I can't find a schematic to confirm that. Did I misunderstand? Oh, you're talking about that stupid 22 ohm in the bias supply, fusible. I think you're misunderstanding me. Let me confirm that. I'm going to pull up the schematic for the reissue, so I can tell you part numbers. I know the circuit, but I don't. You say it's R69, and I believe you, but I don't know I don't know what the numbers are on the schematics. So recent Fender schematics. Deluxe Reverb. Oh, that's right. It's under 65 deluxe reverb. All right. All right, and let's see. Can I rotate this damn thing? Oh, I wish people wouldn't post 180 degree or 90 degree rotated things. Let's see. Where is that bias resistor? Where is it? Oh, I see what they've done. Okay. What the hell? Just a second. Sorry. I know this is great watching. It's very entertaining. I can't get the thing to rotate. And now it's spazzing on me. Well, someone's got to pull up the schematic for the 65 reissue Fender. Anyway, they've got an added 22 ohm resistor there, and then they have a standard 470 ohm going before the diode, which is how a deluxe reverb is supposed to be. That 22 ohm is put there to be a fuse. And it's stupid to fuse a bias supply. You should never fuse the bias supply with a resistor or with a fuse. So I'm not saying to replace the 22 ohm with a 470 ohm. There is already a 470 ohm in there. I was hoping this would take like 5 seconds to pull up on the schematic, but I couldn't get it to rotate without downloading it. You just jumper the 22 ohm. So where the 22 ohm is, you just put a bare wire. Sorry that took so long, guys. Let's see. Oh, BC Electronics, you're asking a question about making an amp. You can have the 5F, you can have the cathode follower tone stack out of one channel and the AB 165 out of one. All right. Well, it depends on what, if you're going to use the AA864 output section, keep the negative feedback the way it is, and you probably start with just two 220K mix resistors, and then if one channel is louder than the other to the point where it's objectionable to you, balance them. So if one channel is louder, increase that mix resistor, or vice versa. As long as you keep the don't go lower than 100K on the mix resistors, and don't end up with anything over 1 meg on the mix resistors. AJ, his amp is not as loud as it used to be despite changing the tubes a number of times. Not sure why. It could be a number of things, but I can't tell you all the way from over here. I'm sorry. Seth B., he's going to go do some power supply math. You have fun with that, Seth. I know you got that. Bathurst is a car race. Sorry. Thank you, Andy66. Do I have any videos on effects loop wiring? From Marshall style, are there differences? I have videos where I've added effects loops, both active and passive, but not a specific video on installing an effects loop. I'm not a big believer in effects loops for Marshall style amps for optimal sound, but if you're going to do it, the one that Headfirst sells, the one that Metro sells, the one that Dave Friedman sells, are all variations on the same quite good idea, and they're probably as good as you're going to get for a Marshall style effects loop. And when it comes to Fender amps, I'm not sure that they need them at all. it seems to me that if you're doing the big rig for live, big, if you're at the level where you need to have all that stuff sound like a record live, you probably have the money to get aux boxes and stuff like that and add all that stuff in post, which will not interfere as much or if any are debatable with the sound of the actual amp. But I think if you look at, I've got some videos up on some Friedmans. I don't remember which video it is, but I show making some changes to his effects loop, et cetera, et cetera. But basically, in most Marshalls, you're just adding it from the treble wiper before the input of the phase inverter. Sometimes there'll be master volume after the effects loop. PF, thank you very much. Appreciate that. He says a 2204. That's a Marshall 50 watt JCM 800 style that blew a mains fuse. He's checked the transformers, tubes, checked 90% of components, and still lights up his current limiter. Any suggestion to narrow my search? Well, when I'm in that situation and I have an amp with that's drawing way too much current, the first thing I do is I pull all the tubes. Is it still drawing the current? All right. Well, then I've got something that's probably shorting somewhere. Let me disconnect the heater secondaries. Still drawing too much current. Let me disconnect the bias secondaries. Still drawing too much current. Disconnect the HT secondaries. Still drawing too much current. Is there a low voltage secondary for like a 20-volt thing? If so, disconnect that. If you're still drawing too much current, disconnect the primary. Still drawing too much current? No. Well, then the primary is shorted. But yet, primary is disconnected, but still drawing too much current. You've got a bad switch, or some amps have thermistors in the incoming AC wiring. Those can short, or smoothing caps, which can short. So take it secondary by secondary is the best way to do it. Just be methodical. You will find it. Clyde recently asked a YouTuber why he didn't show gut shots on his amp reviews. He said, I don't take guitars apart either. Why would I? My thoughts and advice would I give them if they asked? Well, in a certain world of guitar collection, say if this were an actual 51 Telecaster and George Gruen were selling this, or Carter Vintage or one of the other things, they would take this open and show you the codes on the pots, or they would open this and show you that it says 1952 and it has a T for Tadeo, et cetera, or they would show you beneath and show you that the pickups had not been changed, all the solder joints were original. So that's at the various high end of guitar collecting. Most people who are just buying a used guitar are not in the market for a 51 Tele, so they don't go to that extreme. They just say, does it work? Great. Unlike guitars, though, it doesn't matter how old the guitar is. There's nothing in a guitar that will kill you, whereas an amplifier can kill you. There's also, when you buy a guitar, the average guitarist is buying things that they understand. And they can pick it up and just, the frets are all sprouted, or, the neck's warped, or, wow, the inlays are falling out. All the things that are usually wrong with the guitar, most guitarists can find themselves and recognize what they're seeing. Amps, unless you show what the inside is, no one can tell you what's inside an amp because it's just a sealed box. Now, granted, most guitarists would not know, looking at gut shots of amps, whether something's good or not. There's a series of pictures and videos going around from the NAMM show last week, whatever it was, of this new hand-wired amp, and people were oohing and ahhing over it because they painted all the resistors and capacitors black. And it looks cool as hell. It looks like Darth Vader's amplifier. But it just makes inevitable service more expensive, and it's silly because, I can see, that's a 22 nanofarad Mallory under that black paint, or, I can measure the turrets, and I'll know what that resistor is underneath the paint. It's an added labor step for nothing. But if there are pictures of an amp available, then people can take the pictures to a tech. Hopefully everyone would either have a tech or have access to amp tech. Say, what does this look good? because there are a lot of amps out there that sell for a lot of money that some gut shots would reveal are very problematic. Like that Morgan with the 400 volt caps that failed because it had more than 450 volts present. If someone had looked at that and said, hey, this thing only has 400 volts, how many volts are present in the amp? A tech would say, don't buy that. Or if they'd shown all the spaghetti wiring underneath the board, all the excess wiring, so it helps people make more informed decisions about whether they're actually getting the value for money and whether something is safe. Because if I sell you a Telecaster and the capacitor has failed, the tone circuit doesn't work. If I sell you the amp to go with it and the capacitor's failed, you can die. It's a big difference. Oh, T777. I like Uncle Doug an awful lot. I don't think it's a contest. I don't think anyone needs to like anyone more than anyone else. But if that were the case, I'm glad you chose me. Can you hear how good an amp sounds by watching a video? Thanks as always. I don't know. That's my never-ending quest. Every few months, I think I get closer to that. I will say that video of the Tellys the other day through the 66 reverb, mic'd with the Royer and the SM57, listening to the Yamaha HS7s and through my, just dropped a bag on the floor, my Beyerdynamic headphones, as well as playing back in my car and other things. That's very, 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 very close to what those guitars and amps sounded like in the room, with the difference being you would need to have speakers like I have and then play it back about 95 dB to hear what to really get the sense of what that amp sounds like in person. So if you have really good speakers on your end and you're willing to play them back just about as loud as a Super Reverb on 4, which is loud, I guess it was about 3.5, then yeah, you'll know how good that amp sounds by watching a video, because I'm not editing them. I do, when I record a video these days, the 57 comes in on one track, the R10 comes in on another track. I have them time aligned, and then I'm setting the recording so that they peak about -6 dB. And then I go back on each one and I normalize each one so that it peaks at -1 dBo, digital. And then I do a mix, and I think on that one I had the Royer down by 3 dB and the SM57 down by 7 dB. That was the mix I liked. And beyond that, there was no EQ, compression, or limiting of any sort added. Let alone reverb or anything. So that was a pretty accurate recording of what a Telecaster straight into a 66 Deluxe reverb, Super Reverb, with a slightly buzzy old CTS Alnico speaker sounds like. So I'm trying. Well, Brad, that Moog is at least one power cable away from revolutionizing music for a few more decades. What did I drop? A second. But when I open it up, I'll find out if it needs anything else. Greg Lynch, you're very welcome for the reissue videos. Yeah, Green Go, thank you. Yeah, sometimes I only have one channel on. Sometimes I have both. It's prettier on the video for both. I could hook up 4, and then you have all kinds of colors. I do use the scope, but I don't often show it in videos because it takes so long to explain to people what I'm doing with it and why. And then there'll always be some other guy who has a preferred method of doing it. And nothing worse than a bunch of geeks arguing in public. For the record, on that subject, Han did not shoot first. Han was the only one who fucking shot. That's the whole point. Could you elaborate on how the EQ controls on the Tweed Super Pro Bandmaster are interactive and add gain depending on how you set them? Let's say a V4A Bassman. Thanks for everything, Lyle. Well, they're interactive because they don't have discrete frequencies. So it's not like, let's divide the screen right in half, okay? It's not like everything here is treble and everything here is bass. And so the bass knob stops here and then goes down to here, and the treble stops here and goes up to here. The bass is everything to everything, though it decreases as you go up. And the treble at the other side is everything to everything, though it decreases. And so where they interact, the middle range, if you turn the treble up and you turn the bass up, you're going to bring up the mids. If you turn both of them down a little bit, you're going to have what to our ears is balanced, to a scope is actually scooped. And as you turn them both down, depending on the circuit, you either have silence or you'll have nothing but the mids left, kind of a muddy hill in the middle. And the reason that they get louder and you add gain depending on how you set them is because they are passive. All they can do is turn down the frequencies associated with them. So if you turn them to 10, you will get almost the same level as what's coming into both of them. But the mid-range thing and the slope resistor does change that to some degree. You'll get actually a balance in favor of the treble if you turn them all the way up. But you'll have less insertion loss, so it'll get gainy. Not as gainy as having no tone stack at all, but pretty gainy. The thing is, the tone stack is not designed to sound its best at 10. It is designed to sound its best closer to noon. If you saw that tele video, we had the middle and bass exactly at noon, and we had the treble just a hair over. So it was at 6, the others were at 5.5. And that's where that tone stack is designed to be fairly neutral, meaning that you have not lost a ton of gain, but the balance is as designed. And then subtle tweaks give pretty drastic interaction results. But I can talk about it and talk about it and talk about it. The best thing for you to do is just sit down in front of one and turn the knobs and see, how does the mid-range change, especially on a Fender that doesn't have a mids control. Hey, Vinicius, thanks for joining us. Jerry Langle, I am, of course, still repairing and restoring all Fender amps. I am really backed up right now, though. Email me and I will try to get back to you. Hey, Paul, I'm sure lots of people have made EL34 single-ended amps. In fact, I used to own one. I had a THD THD Univalve. And I had a 34 in there, and a KT66, and a 30, and a 6V6, and a 6L6, and they all sounded quite good. I thought there was less difference between them than people claimed. I thought the EL84 with the yellow jacket was the most distinctive sounding compared to the others. But yeah, you can do a 5E single-ended EL34. You can do it well. You can do it horribly. But typically, people don't use EL34s or 6L6s, let alone KT88s or 6550s, because generally a single-ended amp is done for budget concerns. So people typically want to have a smallish power transformer, both for size and cost. And so you don't want to have something that handles you don't need to have something that handles too much current. So there are an awful lot of EL84s and 6V6s and similars out there. But yeah, you absolutely can do a 34 and have it sound good. Hey, James Rowland. What speaker would I recommend for a deluxe reverb reissue that retains some mid-range but is a tad less muffled than the C12K? Well, the ET65 is the one that you hear the most on my channel, and I've got some deluxe reverb speaker comparison videos that all feature that. It's certainly a lot less muffled than the C12K, but it's not a bright speaker. no one who's deluxe I've put a ET65 in has ever been unhappy. Some people have been thrilled. Other people have been, yeah, that's really good. It is one of my top 5. I also like the G12C, which is a little more sparkly. G12C is like a Riviera Paradise thing. ET65 is more like a Robin Ford kind of thing. That's all player dependent. And there's some other things that are great for deluxe reverbs, but almost any other speaker will sound better than the C12K. The C12K is just horrible, as you can hear in some of my videos. Let's see. Thanks, Ramalama Ding Dong. I keep hearing about how wonderful the coffee in Sydney and Melbourne are. I'm just not sure if it's worth 18 hours to see if they're right, but also never see Brad drinking coffee. Flat whites don't count. Oh, Mr. Anderson 59. I am a huge unfan of the Origin 50. He should be aware that the master volume's useless, that the amp sounds pretty bad. There's a power resistor which has got more than 2 watts on it, and it's a 2-watt resistor, and as a result it burns. And there are a lot of mods out there that people push on those. I don't think that any of them are worth doing. I think just sell it to someone who's more impressed by the logo than how it sounds, and get a good amp instead. I think the Origin series is horrible. I think the DSL 40 series kills it. Not the DSL 20, not the DSL 5, the DSL 40. I'm not saying the DSL 40 is a fantastic amp. Just in comparison to just about everything else they're making right now, it is, in comparison, phenomenal. Thanks, buddy, with an H. Is there any way to easily add the reverb to the normal side of the deluxe reverb? Yeah, you can take a deluxe reverb. Now, how you implement this is going to depend on your skill level. Down at the phase inverter input, there are 2 220K resistors, one of which is tied to a wire or a trace, which is connected to the output of the normal channel, which is going through a 47 nanofarad cap straight to this 220K resistor. You lift that 220K resistor or just lift that resistor, and you probably remove, it's usually a blue wire and an old one that goes to that 47 nanofarad cap. So then at the treble, so the vibrato channel, it's got a 22 nanofarad cap on its output, on V2B's output. And the point where that cap goes, then goes to both to a 500 picofarad cap, which feeds the reverb circuit, and goes to the 3.3 meg resistor bypassed by a 10 picofarad cap, which is the dry signal part of the reverb mix. You want to lift that 22 nanofarad cap up on V2B, so it's not tied either to the wire which goes to the 3.3 meg or to the 500 picofarad. You want to leave the 500 picofarad and the 3.3 meg tied together. So then you've got, at this point, you've got a 47 nanofarad on the normal channel, and you've got I'm going to do it from your perspective. So 47 nano, if you're looking inside the chassis, 47 nanofarad cap on the output of V1B, and then a 22 nanofarad on the output of V2B. You want to tie those two caps together through a new pair of 22K resistors back to that junction of the 500 picofarad cap and the wire that goes to the 3.3 meg resistor. And then you'll have reverb and trim on both channels, but you're mixing the AC signals rather than the DC. And it's quiet, and it's non-invasive and can be put back to stock. And if it's done in a reissue or other modern clone, then you can just add a little what do you call it? Sorry, I'm still waking up today. You can add a little terminal strip between V1 and V2 and put the caps and added resistors right there and leave the original stuff on the board untouched. Or if it's a vintage one, say it's a vintage amp, I'm not going to make that change. But I know how I could have. So it's easy once you know how, which Fender doesn't seem to know. Hey, Crystal Ship. I don't have any thoughts on Rev amps because I've not tried one, I've not heard one in person, I've not been inside one. I hope that they're fantastic. I've heard really good things about them, but I have not encountered one yet. Thanks, Jorge. I appreciate that, Jorge. Sorry, Spanish was a long time ago, and it comes and goes because I was for our trip in 2019. I was trying to pick up Portuguese phrases and brush up on my Italian, and then in last year we went to Paris. So I was brushing my French, and when we went to Vienna, I didn't bother trying anything beyond the basics because most Austrians speak better English than Memphians do. But that means my high school Spanish has gotten all jumbled up with 3 other Romance languages. Siento. Let's see. Catching up. Brad's trying to tell me how to use a PC. I used to be a specialist for IBM, Brad. It was viewed in a browser, not in a PDF app. Anyway, ET9 is good, Nick. It's just a little bit. ET9 is just a little bit darker than ET65. I don't know that it's actually darker. It just takes so much more energy to get it moving that it at the same with the same app. Typically, it will appear a little bit darker. Let's see. Des, I don't think there's much you can do to a DSL 40CR to make it bulletproof. I mean, they are good for what they are. Make sure all the hardware is tight. Make sure that all the fuses are the correct ratings, and try to baby it. They're not world-class construction, but they're also not world-class prices. So I think they're a good bargain. Hey, Gary. He was wondering how close the Fender reissues are to the actual AB763 circuit. Are they completely different? They're 99% the same. As far as the circuit goes, there are a couple little things. They have heater balance resistors that are fused. They've got a smoothing cap the originals didn't have on the AC supply. They've got that stupid 22 ohm fusible resistor in the bias supply, like we mentioned. 100 microfarad bias cap versus the old 50. That doesn't really matter. There are differences that are not apparent on the schematic, like they'll have a couple places that they use a film cap, whereas the originals use a ceramic, which is a price point consideration. In general, I can't think of any other thing where, on top of my head, where there's a radical difference in the schematic. Some things are component values. Some things are, 22 microfarad versus 16 microfarad filter cap. So that's almost semantics. If the reissue amps did not have the heat issues caused solely by keeping the screen grid resistors and the heater supplies, heater connections on the board, and they had better IC caps than the ones that Fender uses, they would never darken my door. And if they shipped with any speakers other than the stock ones they usually come with, they would sound better out of the gate. They come either typically with the C12K, which is awful, or back in the 90s, the Jensen specially designed for Fender things, which were pretty bad speakers. But they're just a good speaker and a couple of common sense heat reduction issues away from being great amps. The hardware is rarely tight as they come from the factory. Over time, if you have one, the baffle hardware can get a little bit loose. It's important to keep that tight. But they're quite good amps. There was one other thing that came to mind a minute ago. Little things like a stereo quarter-inch foot switch jack instead of dual RCA. But and they've got the bright cap, which most pro players remove on the vibrato channel, but it's easy to remove as well. I think that's one of the reasons they shipped to the C12K. It makes the amp less bright and harsh with the bright cap present, so it's kind of an artificially adjusting the speaker for the version of the amp that most players don't actually like, if that makes sense. Joshua, I would not spend money on any Fender labeled hand-wired. You'll get a better amp for less money from almost any other company doing it. Allen, Clark, Victoria. Thank you, BC Electronics. I am doing well. My daughter is doing awesome. February has been much, much better than January, but I've been spending most of February catching up from the stuff I didn't get to do in January. Let's see. We're going to be doing an intermission in just a few minutes. I'm trying to get catching. Looking healthy. Thanks, Alan. Is the Tele replacing my Strat? No, never. The Tele augments the Strat. The Tele complements the Strat. That EJ Strat is never going anywhere if I have a say in it, but it's always nice to augment Strats. As good as that Strat is, and it'd probably be my Desert Island guitar, but there's no replacing it, ever. I just feel more comfortable with a guitar in my hands. They're my security blankets. Early mid-60s Supro Thunderbolt. Hey, Brett. From Floribama. They're really cool sounding speakers when they're working well. I mean, really cool sounding amps when they're working well. Keeping them working well is tricky, and they're not well built. They were budget amps at the time, pretty much. And so finding one that's still working well, that's in good mechanical and physical condition, can be tricky. But, there's no arguing with the sound once they are working well. And with a couple of minor tweaks, they can give you Zeppelin 1. But Zeppelin 1 is not there in the stock amp. I know it wasn't the Thunderbolt that he used, even though people thought it was. But it is a cool sounding amp. It just... I don't know. I think Jack White kind of artificially raised the price on Supros and Nationals and all that fun stuff. Some of the stuff that was at pawn shop prices should have stayed at pawn shop prices. Johnny Love asks, do 200 watt attenuators exist? He's thinking for his high watt 200 custom amp, UK made. I would assume someone can make you one. I don't know if there's an off the shelf, and I don't know whether that's something that could be paralleled. But talk to Dave Friedman. If he does not have one, he will know someone who does. That wheel has been invented already, but I don't know who sells one. Most people who have a 200 watt amp are doing it because they absolutely do not need an attenuator. Most guys with an attenuator are trying to sneak a 100 watt or 50 watt Marshall in places where they otherwise can't go. Once you have a 200 watt high watt, that's pretty much to any sound guy saying, can you keep it down a little bit? Thanks, PF. Hey, Matt Johnson, you didn't have to do that. I appreciate that very much. He's got Sunday gravy simmering on the stove. Nice. Well, I think on that happy note, it is time to take our first intermission. So we will be rejoining each other in about 7 minutes. And everyone get a cup of coffee or stretch your legs, whatever you need to do. And wish we had a big pot of homemade Sunday gravy simmering in our own houses. Sorry I'm late. Sorry. I spilled some coffee. I had to clean it up. No rest for the wicked. Let's see. Hey, Brendan. The Vibro Champ is just about the same gain as the regular Champ. It's almost going to depend on the strength of the tubes in each individual amp. I love the Vibro Champ. The regular Champ's fine. I think the Vibro Champ's got a little extra character. At least one that suits me better. It's not so much the gain so much as just the way it speaks. The Vibro Champ, I think, speaks more nicely. Hey Luke, I've not tried the any of their hand wired 74X amps. I'll tell you that the Friedman's going to be better, but the 74 might be just fine. I have been very unimpressed with the transformers in the various reissue Marshalls. And it's not just the new ones that are made in Vietnam. The old ones that are made in Malta were also quite bad typically. Brad says, I think it was black heat shrink over all those components, not the black paint that I said. I only glanced at it. Even on the dropper resistors. Wow, yeah. I believe it was a show-only amp. I hope so. And they were protecting the IP they stole. There it is. There it is. It's everything right there. Scott Pickett, yeah, I'm going to be doing the next level amps under 2000. It's just a matter of time. And the marketplace has changed so much because since I did the first two, COVID hit and the used prices went insane and they're coming back down to reality. So if I'd done amps under 2000 a year ago or 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, there are amps that would not have been on that list that today would be on that list. So hopefully the market's going to get a little less insane. Hey Mike, he's asking about the transformer quality in the reissue amps. I find that in general, the reissue Fenders, the transformers are just as high quality as anything else out there from Habor, Mercury, et cetera, et cetera. I only change them when they fail, and I rarely have a failed transformer in a Fender reissue amp. I will change the transformer in a heartbeat if I think it's necessary. I have no allegiance to perceived vintage always, older always being better, and I have no allegiance to any in particular brand, though I've had good relationships with various companies. But I also recognize when something's good, and typically the transformers in reissue Fenders are just fine. Ramblin' Ding Dong asked about the AC30 custom head over the AC15 version. It's not just because of the effects loop. The tone's the same between the two amps, pretty much. The amp with 4 output tubes is going to behave a little bit differently just because of transconductance than 2 output tubes, but it's marginal, and the volume difference is not that great between them. I'm not sure if the AC15, I'm not sure if the AC30 head has the built-in attenuator that the AC15 head has. That may be something in your favor. The effects loop is nicer on the AC30 than the absence of one in the AC15. But again, I'm not sure how necessary an effects loop is in a Vox. I will say the big advantage of the 30 over the 15 is that the 30 has 2 pairs of jacks, input jacks per channel, whereas the 15 just has a single input jack per channel, which means you cannot jumper the channels within the amp. You can always use an ABY pedal, though. And visually, well, actually, visually, I think that the The aesthetics of the 30 are better than the 15 because the 15, the valence is small and the logo looks a little bit cramped on it, whereas on the 30, the logo is just the right proportion. If you're talking about the combos, the sound difference is greater because 2x12 will always sound bigger and fuller and have more oomph than a single 12. Let's see. Oh, the new Gibsons. I have not seen the new Gibson myself, but I saw Brad do a takedown of it, and I strongly recommend that everyone go to Brad's Guitar Garage after this and look at his takedown of the new Gibson. And Brad, stick the link in the chat for everyone. The new Gibson is a cheap Mesa, all full of quick connects that's labeled as hand-wired. Deceptive at the very least. It's a pretty crappy amp that's selling for what, $2,000. I think it's overpriced by about $1,600. Thank you, Jorge. He's trying to connect the heaters of a Fender issue directly to the sockets. How to solder 3 wires in the hole? They don't fit. Okay, it's tricky. What you want to do is you want to go to the leftmost octal socket, which will only have 2 wires existing there, 1 wire going to the next socket, and then a small pair of wires going to the lamp. So what you do is I remove the old wires, disconnect the old wires, I remove all that solder. There are 2 holes per lug in the socket connections itself. I put the wires from the secondary in the lower hole, and I put the wires going from there to the next octal socket in the upper hole, and I make sure that those are good and tight. And then if I cannot fit the small wires from the lamp in those holes, then I'll tack solder the wires from the lamp to the solder joints where the actual large current carrying 18 gauge wires are, because it doesn't matter to the amp's performance if the the lamp becomes disconnected, whereas it matters very much if your heater becomes disconnected. So there are always workarounds. That's the best way to do it. But the first thing you need to do is get the old solder out and the old wires out. Hey, Jeff. For those who've been living under a rock who don't know, Jeff McErlane is a phenomenal guitarist and educator with a great channel, and he's seemingly a nice guy, though that could all be an act. And he's been making me practice. But I won't subject you to my practice sessions here. But I also need to study his lighting. He's got his light up high pointing down. Not only does it give him beauty lighting with the butterfly beneath his nose, but also means he doesn't get big reflections off the guitar. So I've got this a little bit higher than I have had it, just to minimize that, though with the telly it was pretty bad. But I really like your setup, Jeff, the way your guitars aren't always flashing big reflections of light. And you sound great, and you play great, and you've got really nice hats. Hey, Johnny, should we alter the impedance setting of the amp when it has a switch to remove 2 tubes out of 4.5 the wattage? In general, yeah, you want to do the impedance trick, and you can Google that. That said, there are a lot of amp companies that don't do that. Mesa, for example, and they tend not to fail for those reasons. Any failures in Mesas are due to other causes. So while it is optimal and best practice to intentionally mismatch the impedance as you pull tubes, and it will give you, not just optimal theoretically, it'll give you the correct performance from a negative feedback circuit and all that. It's not something that'll endanger your amp if you don't. It just won't quite sound as good, and you'll lose about 3 dB in output, which can be can be beneficial. Pros and cons between steel or aluminum for an amp chassis. Hey, Martin. Yeah, aluminum. Some people ascribe certain sound qualities to aluminum versus steel. In general, though, I would say the aluminum chassis don't hold up. They're not strong enough to support the weight of big pieces of steel that we call transformers. Steel is much better than aluminum. It's rugged. It will hold its shape better. It has better mechanical strength over a long period of time. As far as electrical performance, they will both perform shielding functions just fine. There are people who say they can hear a difference. That's great. I'm not sure that many of us have had the chance to compare two vintage Marshalls, one in steel, one in aluminum, otherwise exactly the same. So I'm not sure how valid those sample sizes are. And you have to take a step back and take a bigger picture thing, because you have to think, all right, how do different metals react to each other? Do certain bolts react to aluminum differently than they react to steel? Or, any metal has got pros and cons. You can have a good example of either. It's just in general, steel is a better choice than aluminum, just for longevity and mechanical strength. Thanks, Luke Coffee. Appreciate that. Very kind of you. All right, Jeff's got a question. He's an old super lead. All right. If the channels are internally jumpered and he's going to hum when he turns it up, I don't think that's going to be tied to. I don't think it's going to be tied to jumpering the channels. What can happen, Jeff, and if you're talking about Blackie, maybe he would tell you the same thing. Super leads make their grounds in the preamp from the pot casings to the chassis. And if those grounds are not tight, if those pots are not tight, you will not have a good ground. And a lot of times in a 72 Marshall, the pots will be connected to the chassis with black oxide washers. And black oxide washers over time can have a chemical reaction with the metal of the chassis and the metal of the pot. I prefer to use nickel-plated washers for that reason. But if you want to keep the originals, maybe once every couple of years you could have your tech disconnect the pots and make sure that they are very clean, that the toothed washers are very clean, that the surface of the chassis that they're contacting is clean, and that they are then very, very tight, and that all the ground connections, all the solder joints there are good. But what you're describing sounds like a ground loop. I don't think that it's going to be caused by the jumpering of channels, but it can, when you jumper channels, it can reveal ground loops, because you're going to have more than one path to ground right there at the two grids. So I think it's if that's clear, that's just my long distance diagnosis, but that's what happens an awful lot with such things. But it could be coincidental, but take it to your tech. I'd be glad to talk to you about it, but I don't want to, second guess your tech. Sergey, I don't have anything pro or con to say about it. Laney 12R Cub. I think Laneys are much more popular in the UK and possibly in Europe than they are in the States. They just haven't gotten a lot of traction. They've always been seen as kind of the Burger King to Marshall's McDonald's, if that makes sense. Oops, wrong button. Let's see. I'm going to go out on a limb, Brad, and say have an experience with two rock amps. They're really well built and they sound great. And I was mentioning that you should check out Jeff McErlane. He certainly puts them to good use. I don't have anything negative to say about two rocks. It is a considerable expenditure for a lot of people, but I think they are one of the amps where it'd be worthwhile. I'm sitting here looking at a 66 Super Reverb. That's an expensive amp for a reason. But it's worth every penny when all of a sudden you just plug a guitar straight in and sound like your heroes, or sound like you while your hero's out of the room and you're just stealing their rig. Let's see. I don't have any experience, Matthew, with the BAD versions of Soldanos. I hope that they're great. I have nothing but warm thoughts towards them, and I hope that they pulled it off. But I know that the Soldanos that Mike made, or Mike supervised the making of, were probably the ones to seek out if you can afford them. But the only experience I have with Soldanos are actual Soldanos back in the day. Sorry. Let's see. Jaylene Polanco says, please give vintage 60s and 70s trainer amps buying tips. She wants to know my take on the bigger 100-watt heads. She's still open to the idea of getting a high-watt amp for pedals or a YBA1. Well, I'm in Memphis, and we don't get a lot of trainers here. I think if you were to ask one of my compatriots, comrades in arms, not compatriots, in Toronto or Montreal, they would have much more experience with trainers. We just don't have that many down here. And of the ones that I have had, I quite like the Bassmasters, the YGM, YBAs and such. I can't remember the model number. So the trainers I have had, by and large, have been great, with some peculiarities, some of which I retained, some of which I changed out, like that circuit breaker is a terrible idea. And the bright cap in those things will take your head off. And they used a lot of linear taper pots, for instance, for volumes, which means it goes from nothing to, oh my God, that's loud. So I'll change those out for audio. But the core amp has always been really great. But I don't have experience with the 100-watt heads. The only 100-watter I've had, it might have been an 80-watter, I don't know, is I've got their version of the Twin up on the channel that I did maybe 5 years ago? Maybe just 3. But I don't have a lot of experience with a lot of trainers. Sorry. Oh, hi, Mark. Let's see. Hey, Gast. What do I think of the blue versus the green in the Vox AC15C1? I have the green in mind, but I'm super curious about the blue. I guess I should just try. Well, yes, first of all, you should just try. Second of all, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a Vox Fest because I have a 64 AC10 here. I have a 64 AC30 here. I have what I believe to be a 62 or very early 63 AC30 here. And I have 2 AC15C1s, one which has the green, one which has the blue. And so I'm going to be doing a video, and I think I might use some of the loop performances I have here to show the AC10 through the AC15 cabs, the blue and the green, and the AC15C1 through both the blue and the green, and the AC30s through my shop cab, and the AC15s and the AC10 through my shop cab, so you can hear all these different Voxes, both very expensive, rare, sought-after JMIs and current production AC15s that can get used for $400 or $500 through a range of speakers, including the ET65, the Veteran 30, the Celestion Blue, and the Greenback. So it sounds like you will be one of the people who will probably enjoy that video, and that'll all be well recorded with the Royer, et cetera, et cetera. But in the meantime, as good as job as I can possibly do on the recording, nothing will beat the sensation of you playing the amp. Now, that said, the AC15C1, whether it's the blue or the green, is a open back 1x12, and it's a little bit congested, and it's hard for the amp to build up low end. So the space the amplifier is in matters an awful lot. If I put that amp out in the middle of my room, it's a little bit anemic in the low end. If I move it closer to the wall, about 6 inches to a foot away from the wall, the low end gets louder. So make sure that if you do get a chance to compare them, first of all, try to play one amp through both cabs rather than that amp to that amp, because more on that in a moment. But then make sure that they're in the same acoustic space. Don't have one right in front of you on a carpet and the other one against a corner on hardwood, because the amps will sound totally different. The reason I mentioned you want to have just one amp for that comparison if you're comparing the speakers is because the blue, I've got a blue and a black AC15 here, and as the blue one came in and I first tested it, it sounded fine, and then I played the black one, and the black one had so much more gain, at which point I realized that, hey, okay, we had two very weak preamp tubes in the blue, and those things ship with very generic tubes of varying strengths, and a 12AX7 has a nominal gain factor of 100, but that can measure anywhere from 50 to 100, with a lot of the generics measuring in the 70 to 80 range. And you get three things that have a low gain factor versus three tubes that have a high gain factor. You have very different sounding amps as a result. So you want to minimize the number of variables when trying to make a speaker choice. And again, short question, really long answer. It's no wonder I never get through all the questions in these things. Michael Matson just got a Fender Deluxe Vintage modified for $650 at a pawn shop. Any problem with this? I will talk to them now as much as I can. Thanks. I don't know what a vintage modified is. Sorry. I'm unfamiliar with a Fender model called the Deluxe Vintage Modified. Maybe someone else will know. Sorry. Hey, Michael Padilla. You're his 60-year-old 64 Deluxe Reverb. Is it feasible to remove the stock metal feet to install a bigger set without messing up the cab? Yeah, that thing's just nailed in. Those little metal feet are just glorified thumbtacks, and if you're very, very careful, you can remove them without doing. You might end up marring the Tolex a slight bit, but if you're going to be putting on larger rubber feet, it'll cover it up. But you can just get two small flathead screwdrivers and get them between the metal feet and the Tolex and gently pry them up, and they'll pop right out. And then you can just put a screw right in the old hole where that pin was, because it's just like a thumbtack, just has a pin on those things. And you on a 64. Later ones in the 70s, they had a screw. But at that point, just. And the thing is, with large rubber feet, you probably want to use a number 8 sheet metal or wood screw for that, so you won't be removing a lot of wood or doing any real damage. Hey, Luke, I appreciate the super chat. I already answered the question from the first time you asked it, and I'm not trying to be like school teacher here. I just want everyone to know that if you ask a question and I've not gotten to it yet, you don't have to ask a super chat for me, pay a super chat for me to answer your question. I will get to it, and I'll try. If you've been paying attention, I've been trying to answer every question. Super chats are always appreciated by me because they buy coffee and important things like that. But they are not a requisite for me to answer your question. But because I get a lot of questions on here, and I do try to answer them as fully as is feasible, it takes a while. So patience. But if you ask a question and I don't, it's later in the stream, I may not get to it that day. If you do a super chat, I will make sure that I get it that day. That's the only preference I show to super chats. And just because I don't have someone here saying, "Hey, you got a super chat," we pop it up on the screen for you. I just can't spend my day chasing them. I have to go in the sequence that they come in. I hope everyone understands that. Collie Dog Joy says, "Hey man, love my Blues Junior. You'll never change my mind. Thanks for the great videos. Love the hand-wired reverb the other day." Hey, I'm not trying to change your mind about whether you like the sound of a Blues Junior. I can get some really nice sounds out of a Blues Junior. If I had a Blues Junior right here now, and I turned the mids way down, and especially if I removed the stupid bright cap, and it was being played into a better speaker than the stock one, it would sound pretty much, it would hold up pretty well to the super reverb. The trouble is, it would be catching on fire through a slow, gradual process that whole time. So, they sound good. They just don't last. And that's a different aspect of things. Thanks, Mark. That Tele Shootout was fun. I'm going to be giving a follow-up later this week. That white Tele is getting some new pots. It's got 500K pots in there, and the bridge pickup was insanely high to compensate for the neck pickup being insanely high. So that white Tele can sound a lot better with those mojo tones than it did. But I don't think they're going to be a winner for us here. But Hal, who's white and yellow Teles were there, the one with the mojo tones and the one with the Fenders. He has a third Tele, and he's ordered a set of the Murrays, though he's getting the Broadcaster Bridge. So that'll be fun to check out in about 3 weeks when those arrive. The Broadcaster Bridge. It was an imperfect test because I was not putting the same pickups in the same guitar with the same strings and playing the exact same part at the exact same tempo with the exact same picking, because that's a really long process to try to do a video like that. But in a real-world comparison, I thought if you were to go to a shop and those were the 4 Teles there, and you're playing each one through a 66 Super Reverb, it's a pretty good judge of what a guitar and pickup sound like. It gave a real good sense of what those pickups sounded like in the individual guitars. The white one can be tweaked a little bit better, and I've made some improvements to the Murray bridge aspect since then. That'll also be in that video. But I thought it was clear to me and to the other 2 guys and to most of the commenters that the Lawlers and the Murrays did the Tele thing better than the Fenders, with the asterisk on that and the mojo tones. Now that Fender Yosemite bridge pickup to me did not sound like a 50s Tele at all, but it sounded an awful lot like a 60s, say mid to late 60s Fender Telecaster bridge. So if you were trying to do a Don Rich tribute kind of thing for Buck Owens, it was there. But you won't hear it for real here in this, but you can see in the thumbnail, I took this apart and got rid of that surgical tubing, and I put in some springs. And this bridge pickup is much more alive now. But when that demo gets done, I'll get someone to do some proper chicken picking for you guys. You'll be hearing me play those guitars a lot in videos as I test amps, but there's a difference between me using a guitar to test an amp and me getting a pro player in here to show you what a guitar sounds like. So, Curtis Everett, yeah, 3.7 is interchangeable from 4 ohm. Let's see how far down this rabbit hole to get into. Let me just say that when you're rating the impedance of a speaker, the impedance does not always directly correlate to the DC resistance reading that you get across that speaker. And speakers have different impedances at different frequencies. And most meters measure DC resistance at one frequency only. And so in the real world, a 4 ohm load is the same as a 3.7 load. It does not matter at all. It's like you look at a old Celestion Blue. It says it's a 15 watt speaker. It's also a 16 watt speaker. It just depends on what frequency you're measuring it at. Good, and they've got 2 heater wires and then 1 wire going off to the lamp. My guitar journey. Is there a reliable alternative to Mesa Boogie Mark V head? Ability to switch between British and American tones would be nice too. Yeah. Top of my head, the Suhr PT100 or PT15 would do it, and as well as the old custom audio electronics amps that he did. The big 100 watters, you can go from, they have 3 channels, and you can voice them in very similar ways. But unlike the Mesa, the cleans won't be hissy, and the high gain won't be congested in MIDI, and it won't catch on fire, and about the same price or less. So I would look at Suhr, S-U-H-R, if you're unfamiliar with them. Hey, T777. Yeah, the Friedman Runt 20 combo, the clean channel is pretty good. The 50 is the channel from a super reverb, more or less, a little bit of difference, but not much. The 20, it's a good channel. I think the dirty channel will be too loud for home playing. It has a master volume, but if you're going to spend $1,000 to $1,600 depending on used versus new, play one before you buy one if you can. But it's a good sounding amp, and the dirty channel also is a very nice clean channel. I mentioned that in the review on that amp. Oh, plush tube amps. Kevin Brinkerhoff wants to know, plush tube amps. They can sound really, really good when they're working. They're an awful lot of expense to get working, and people don't want them. So if you get one working, you're probably not going to get that back if you ever decide to sell it, because no matter how good they are inside, and a lot of them are essentially Fenders, a comparable quality of the same era of Fender, with the same ability to make them slightly better with reducing wiring, spaghetting and stuff, they still look like something that Danny Partridge would plug into, and people don't want that because they have that whole plush, cushy, custom, kitschy association. So while they can sound very good, it takes some money to restore them, and you won't get that money back most likely unless you're playing in a band where the kitsch is part of it. Bebop wants to know, could I discuss the plus and minuses of silver mica capacitors? Yeah, the pluses are that they are capacitors, and they do have a slightly different sound than a ceramic, and a slightly different sound than a polystyrene, et cetera, et cetera. But the cons only apply to the generic ones. The generic ones would just say SM. They leak, they fail, they buzz, they're bad. I've not had that high failure rate with ceramics. I've not had that high failure rate with the CDE and CDM branded ones. And I've not had that high failure rate with polystyrenes. But the polystyrenes, of course, are expensive, microphonic, with very, very fragile leads and should be used sparingly for most applications these days. But, if you have a good branded silver mica and you like the sound, then it's all the way pro. If you like the sound but it says SM, then you're just waiting for the con to drop. All right, Brad's bringing up a good point about the heater wires and amps. He's saying if you get 18 gauge and you can't make it fit, you may not need 18 gauge, and he's absolutely right. And I don't want to give too much of a blanket statement here, but you need to be able to measure the total current draw of tubes. So 12AX7, 12AT7, 12AY7 is going to draw 300 milliamps each, and a 6 L6 draws twice as much current as a 6V6. So you need to know what a 6V6 pair of 6V6 draws. So, and then you know what all your preamp tubes draw. And I'm not going to get into the math right now, but I'll tell you, if I were wiring a deluxe reverb from scratch, I would use 20 gauge. I would use, whatever the secondaries are. I bring the secondaries directly to the octal socket. From the first octal socket, where the secondaries are connected, to the next octal socket, I would use 20 gauge. And then going from that second power tube, octal socket, to all subsequent preamp tubes, I would use 22 gauge because that long a piece of 22 gauge wire can more than handle the 1 amp that might be totally present from all those tubes, whatever it works out to be. You do the math. It's, there's a current capability of a wire, but you have to look at what that distance is. And 22 gauge is fine for 6 preamp tubes in a Fender preamp. If you have 6V6s, 20 gauge is fine. If you have 6 L6s, you probably want to use 18 gauge. And from the wires going from the octal socket to the heater lamp, I'll typically use 22 gauge there. You could use less. Old Fenders will bring the secondaries to the heater lamp and then stiff wire from there to the octals, and that's just 2 big paths of stiff wire. If I were redoing it from scratch, I would do the secondary directly to the octal and then run some small wire to the lamp, just to keep the heavy stuff from floating around, because that's the stuff that gets stressed and wants to disconnect. James F. says, "Hi, Lyle. How far off is a silver face from being a Dumble?" About $43,000 and about $20 worth of parts. Do I recommend the London Power books to learn from? Yes, with reservations, but my reservations, I don't know how valid they are, because I've got a couple of his Ultimate Tone series, but they were from 15 years ago, and there are a couple of mistakes in them. And for all I know, he has since done revised versions which do not have the mistakes. Some mistakes like how to do a bootstrap master volume into JCM 800. I don't want to get too far in the weeds. The trouble is, at least with the version that I have, until you know that what you're seeing is a mistake, you wouldn't know that it's a mistake. But the majority of the information is great. And for instance, we were just talking about heater current and how to figure out how much current you're going to need to be able to maintain. He handles stuff like that. I think in Ultimate Tone 3, he handles very, very well, and it's a great resource. So yeah, I'm a big fan of books in general. I think you should get as many books as you possibly have room for and can afford, and his are on the list. I would probably start with Merlin Blenco's valvewizard.co.uk's books. I think they're a good starting point, but I don't have any problem, at least with Kevin's books more on the basics. I think sometimes Kevin has some circuits which, in an attempt to solve one perceived problem, introduce other real possible failure modes that would not be there except for a perceived problem that rarely ever becomes an issue for anyone in practice. But that's a valid thing for, back off, man. I'm a scientist. We get all up in the weeds on this stuff, so I'm not criticizing him. But I think some of the things he gives importance and weight to aren't the things the rest of us often find that important. Hey, Raph, thanks. He had a 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue. Had uncontrollable reverbs squeal the other night. Sounds fine now. Have I seen this before? Thanks. Yeah. If you could have just a bad or dirty connection to a cable, that's the most likely cause. It could also be, however, that you have an electrolytic capacitor which is either failing, or you have a bad solder joint that became a little bit loose and then it got hot and then it's connected. I would if it happens again, take it to a tech or open it up. But it could also just be that you had a dirty connection on a tank and something, something vibrated in just the way that it's fine. But I have seen it before, but it's not always the same cause. Augmented Hal says, neck pickup in this doesn't sound very good. Sorry. We'll be getting to that. I'll do a review of this guitar later. All right, T777 loves his new Fender hand-wired tweed champ. Sounds great, feels great, but has excessive hum, and mine is in the shop in just under 2 years. You got a brand new 20% off for just under $1K. Well, I'm glad you got a good price on it. but a Champ shouldn't have excessive hum. And if it's a hand-wired Tweed Champ, aside from needing new tubes occasionally, it should not need to go in the shop uh, in under 2 years. So. Oh, Minivan Megafun 100, hi from Canada. I don't know what the quality of the components of the most popular amp kits are because I don't pay attention to the amp kits out there. I've seen a few. I've seen Tube Depot and Mojotones kits, but just glancing at the pictures, and they seem okay. Not everything that is what I would use, but it's nothing there that I think, oh, that's horrible. But I don't know if those are the most popular amp kits. I know the Fromel stuff is selling good parts at a huge markup that you can get the same parts elsewhere for much cheaper, and he's selling orange drops, telling you to put them into PCB amps where the hole in the PCB board is not large enough to accept the lead of a 600 volt orange drop, and so people mangle their boards. So I take all amp mod kits with a bag of salt, but I'm in a relatively privileged position. I recognize that. So, but I'm not the target audience for mod kits. So I don't know what's out there. Ugly Distortion on only his unwound strings. Wound strings and chords sound great on a late 70s 2203. Well, that's the kind of thing that can drive us nuts. I'm not sure because that could be an instability in the preamp. It could be an issue at any particular gain stage, or it could be a problem in the negative feedback circuit. I would take, since it's a late 70s 2203, it's a 100-watt Marshall from the late 70s. It's a fairly valuable amp. I would take that to a tech, a very good tech, as good a tech as you can, because that's the kind of thing that could be an early sign of some other problem that could be expensive to repair. And I think you should certainly get that tracked down. But obvious causes for that's not the kind of thing that there's one, that's always this kind of thing. That's usually a sign of things to look into. Yeah, ZEP1 is usually, it's a 1624T that was dropped and then repaired in such a way that it has some unusual features. And I worked on one of those a long time ago, and I kind of stumbled on what the change was because the stock circuit has got a dumb thing in it. If you say, well, that's dumb, what happens if we do this? All of a sudden it sounds like ZEP1. But if you want to sound like ZEP1, talk to my friend Mitch Colby. He'll be glad to sell you a Sun Dragon, which will absolutely do that if you have the chops. Hey, Tamaz Novak, any thoughts on Marshall 1987X build quality, any common failures? Two things with the 87X, the 59X, pretty much all the X's. Number one, they've got a little blue trim pot for the heater balance, and that little blue trim pot is attached to 200 ohm resistors, also in the bias balance. And that blue trim pot is not rated for the current through that circuit, and it fails. And when it fails, it can damage a lot of things. And the amp is also prone to, if people power it on without using standby, the V2B cathode, which will briefly have a whole bunch of DC on its grid without having anything on its cathode yet, it can fail. And when it fails, it can take out the heaters, which can burn this little blue trim pot. But the blue trim pot has a turret on it behind it, which is ground, and in front of it, the 200 ohm resistors are right next to two turrets. So all you have to do is remove those two turrets. Remove those 200 ohm resistors that are on the board, and put two new ones up in the air from each turret on one side of the board to the turret on the other side of the board, which bypasses that little blue bias pot, and then you won't have the big heater burn issues. The other issue is that with all the 87X and all the other issues, the transformers are a crapshoot as to whether they're going to last. I've had brand new ones come in with bad transformers, and I've told the guy, look, we can get you replacements from Marshall under warranty, but they're going to be bad too. Or we can get you a Habor or a Mercury, and you'll spend a lot of money that you shouldn't have to spend, but you'll have what you thought you were buying in the first place. Most owners go with the third-party better iron. All that said, if the transformers are not failing and the power transformer is not buzzing, and you bypass the heater circuit issue, like I mentioned, which is really cheap, 2 10-cent resistors, it's a pretty good sounding out. So I would not dissuade you from it, though I would say it sounds a lot better without the effects loop. Let's see. Oh, thanks, Ronald. Appreciate that. I don't know that I'm the best channel for amps. I think Brad's got great content. Colleen's got some good stuff. Uncle Doug is a treasure trove of teaching, and Jace at Head First does a great job. He's certainly better at demonstrating the amps than I am. I think I explain things better than most, and if anything, it's just that I might have an edge on the storytelling aspect, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm also the oldest of them, except for Uncle Doug. So I think I've just been doing it longer than most of the other guys out there. So I've made a lot of mistakes and don't need to make those particular mistakes anymore. So I think there are a lot of guys out there who are older than I am, who've been doing this longer, who know more. Whether they still remember it all is up to a matter of debate. But they don't tend to be on YouTube or that interested in the social media kind of thing. And a lot of the people I mentioned, Brad, Jace, Colleen, well, especially Brad and Colleen and some others are 20 or more years younger than I am. So they're really ahead of where I was 20 years ago, and they're doing great work. But I don't know, they may not have seen this issue on as many deluxe reverbs as I have. But every day the competition gets better, man. Every day they learn more, and I forget more. So it's dangerous hearing that you're the best at something or hearing that you're great, because Lord help us all if I were to believe that. But the Valve Wizard, Merlin, truly is great. He's really, really freaking smart. And I'm glad that his ground schemes worked for you. No surprise that they did. Hey, John L. He likes the sound of his deluxe reverb reissue with V1 pull. Is there a mod he can do to use the normal channel while retaining that? Channel 2 gain, yeah, it's real simple. On deluxe reverb, V1B and V2B share a cathode, which means that they are each going from cathode to cathode, and then from there to an 820 ohm resistor, which is bypassed with a 22 microfarad cap or a 25 microfarad cap. So all you want to do, if you want to maintain the sound that you like with V1 pulled, while having the normal channel present, is to give V1B its own individual cathode resistor and cap. So V2B still has 820 ohm to ground with that cap, and V1B would then have a new resistor and capacitor to ground. And to give it the same sound it would have in a usual setup, you would use a 1.5K bypass with a 10 microfarad. But if you want to make it sound gainier, you could also do 820 ohm with a 22 microfarad. But if you want the stock sound of channel 1, but to have the gainier channel 2, separate the cathodes and give channel 1 a 1.5K bypass with a 10 microfarad. And there you go. Teresa, I'm not a unfan of Laney amps, but like I said earlier, I just don't see that many modern Laneys here in Memphis or the States in general. The Laneys that I've had that were good were 60s, and you can see one of those on the channel. But even then, it was an odd build with some odd parts that I had not seen used before. And Brad's telling Tamaz exactly the same stuff about the reissue stuff. DMAC asks, what's your take on the reissue 65 Princetons with the 12-inch Cannabis Rex speakers? I assume they're wired like the others. Can use the fix you mentioned, better speaker with the Rex, though. All Princeton reissues are exactly the same internally. There's a 65 circuit, which are all the same. There's a 68 circuit, which is just a 65 that Fender badly modifies. I'm not sure why they do more work on them and then sell them to you at a lower price. But the 68 is just a bunch of bad mods applied to the existing 65, and it just makes for noisier. So if you're going to get a reissue, get the 65, not the 68. That's across the board, Princeton, Deluxe, Super, everything. But any 65 reissue Princeton is the same as any other 65 reissue Princeton as far as the circuit goes. That applies to needing the fixes I mentioned with the heater stuff and the screens and all, and filter caps. The Cannabis Rex sounds better than the C12K. And it sounds better than the custom-made for Fender by Eminence speakers. I'm not a big fan of the C-Rex myself. Some people really like it. I find that people who like the C-Rex tend to have an amp that has the bright cap in it, so it kind of offsets that harshness that the bright cap imparts. I prefer to remove the bright cap. I'm talking about a Deluxe Reverb. Princeton Reverb doesn't have a bright cap. I find the C-Rex just kind of dark and boxy, and if it didn't say cannabis in the name, no one would ever have cared. I'm just being honest. It's a marketing name which went really well. Yeah, it's hemp, whatever. Hemp's just a fiber you can make. It's a little bit gives a slightly darker, stiffer cone, hence the darker sound. No one would care except it says Cannabis Rex. Oh, that's cool, dude. I think a Princeton, even with a 12-inch, is still going to be wanting to be kind of boxy just due to the physical dimensions. I would recommend the Alessandro SE64 or the Warehouse ET65 or the Warehouse G12C over the C-Rex, by a long distance, by a lot. But you may love the Rex, because that's why we have bubblegum ice cream in the world, which I had no vote on. Trainwreck Express fans, I'd say play one before you do that, but of course playing one is tricky, and if you play a clone, you're not sure whether the builder got it right. Asked if you could play any other apps the local builder has built before you spend money on that. Pulling a Trainwreck off right requires a lot of chops on the builder's part. And so you could have built a whole bunch of kit amps, and then you try to sell someone a build on a Trainwreck Express, and it becomes a nightmare for everyone involved. Those things are just one step away from being unstable, noisy, useless things. And so to get them usable and to stay stable and hold things together takes a lot of skill. Cameron Sliger wants to know thoughts on a 60s Ampeg Reverberocket 2 amp. Yeah, they're great. I've got a couple shown on the channel, I believe. They're beautiful amps. They have a very unusual sounding reverb, and it's a little bit tricky to get the reverb quiet, but it's possible. If that's the version where you have to turn the treble all the way to the right, then it clicks, then it engages a bright cap, that was kind of useless. I disabled that in the one I had here. But I like the 60s Ampegs. The issue is that they're so inconsistently built, and they often have a very bad random ground scheme. It takes a lot of gentle massaging to get them to be their best, but it's certainly very possible. And thank you for your kind words. Hey, Jason. Oh, the fiber eyelet board Mojotones sent for a Princeton is fine as long as it's populated correctly and attached to the chassis correctly. But yeah, if you have the space to put in a turret board, fiberglass turret board, fiberglass is always a better choice than the fiber board. The trick was just depending on the dimensions of a fiberglass FR4 board, will it fit easily? And it can be a bit tricky. Thanks, Otto. This is the new 23 Chinese one where they didn't do the stupid sunburst on the sides and the really awful looking sunburst on the back and the black neck. So, and they made a few other tweaks to it with nickel hardware and stuff. Overall, I'm really pleased with it, but I was lucky I got this essentially for cost. So I don't have a lot in this, and so I've been making some changes to it to get it really what I consider a good guitar. It's going to have a review later this week or next week. The long story short will be it's recommended recommended with reservations, but fewer reservations than the previous model. It also doesn't have that ridiculously narrow nut width that the old ones had. But I'd put some 11s on here, and it is not my favorite couch guitar. I can just bend a fourth on the B string. I can bend just a minor third on the E. So, I mean, this with 11s doesn't feel that much different from other Gibsons with 10s. That's about all I got to say about that. Withered Hand Electronic Audio Effects. He's got a Dano DM10. I'm unfamiliar with any Dan Electro amps. He runs a trim into the 6V6 GT. He's only getting half the sound waves. I don't know whether they're doing that into the grid or whether they're affecting the bias of that circuit. I don't know the particulars, and I don't know if that's a single-ended amp or not. So, without the schematic or without having the amp in front of me, I cannot speculate. And Jaylene, I appreciate you asking twice. I answered your question about trainers earlier. I think we're going to take another break, and when we come back, we're going to get to Busker 24's question about why amps with similar circuitry can sound so different, because that's an interesting thing to think about from time to time. So we will be back in 7 minutes. All right. Since I was late on the last intermission, I came back early on this one. And right before we get to Busker 24's thing, I wanted to show off a fun thing that we can do. I hit my mid switch, which I added on the AC15C1. Yay, it works. Should probably turn down the bass a little bit to get a little bit closer. But then again, that wasn't running through the right speaker. That was through the ET65, which is a much bigger sound. All right, why amps with similar circuitry can sound so different. Examples, Soldano dual rectifier 5150. Well, what I just did was a little bit towards that point. It's a different speaker. So your speaker matters a lot. Number two, I added a mid-shift to this Vox, so it doesn't sound like that on a regular Vox. So the circuitry is very similar. So let me show you with and without that switch, though I'm going to have to stand by the amp because it's over there and kind of shout. So see if I can do this without the feedback from being closer to the amp. So this switch is changing one resistor. So here's one resistor. And I changed it. That is an entire amplifier with about 100 plus components. I changed one component value with that switch, and the sound radically changes because I changed a very specific thing. Now, the Soldano has got a different upper mid-range emphasis than the dual rec or the 5150. The dual rec has got a different negative feedback circuit, or fake presence circuit, I should say, compared to the Soldano. The Soldano does a weird thing with some parallel stuff that the others don't do. And the 5150 is very, very bright, but it has a resonant circuit that at least the dual rectifier does not have. And all these changes, even if you just take those in isolation, even though the core sound is very similar, you end up in different places. The same way 59 Bassman is very similar to a JTM 45, but they have different iron and they have different output tubes and a few little changes. For instance, the JTM 45 is actually a copy of the schematic of the 58 Bassman, but the 58 through 60 Bassman rarely followed the schematic. They had a different resistor in the tail of the phase inverter. The negative feedback was implemented differently, and they had a different caps in the tone stack than was listed on the schematic. And there's variation between 220K mixed resistors, 270K mixed resistors, and 470K mixed resistors. And all those things, while you look at it, if you just look at the signal flow, it's the same. Little component changes can make big differences. So that's the easiest way to do this. And as to one being better than the other, or it's, as far as the sound goes, it's totally subjective. What you like is correct for you. As far as the reliability goes, between a 5150, a dual rec, and a Soldano all day long. And if you have a Soldano and you wish it sounded a little bit different, you can have a good tech make subtle changes and get the results you want. Like Warren Haynes played a Soldano for about a decade, but he took out a bright cap. That was his sound without that bright cap. It's a pretty small change as far as what's happening in the app, but it's a big result to the player. Let's see here. Mark Vanderlind, he notices that Blackface and Silverface Bandmasters are more reasonable in prices in New Jersey. They get no love. Any ideas? Well, they're the same app as the others. They just don't have the reverb circuit. So they, in addition to not having reverb, they have a slightly different gain structure with a little less air in the sound. Now, I've got a 60s Bandmaster that is going to be on the channel this week that's going to get restored. And I should have the opportunity to compare that to some other Fenders when it's done, so you get a better sense of that. But the Bandmaster is essentially a 50-watt twin without reverb, or a Pro Reverb without reverb. So it's a great amp, but it doesn't have the full features, and it's a head versus a cab, so they cost less. Let's see here. Dan of New Jersey, 65 Bandmaster is always worth considering, especially since the prices are lower. Solid state versus tube rectifier, that matters a lot less than your timing. A good player is going to be a good player through a Princeton, a Super Reverb, a Bandmaster, or a Pro. No one's going to say, well, that was good, but it sure would have been better if he'd had a tube rectifier. No one cares. We got Dodgson here. No one cares. Let's see. Yeah, I've got a big diffuser, Jeff, as well, but I think yours is bigger. I've got a really big diffuser over my bench, which is this light here is at 30% right now. If I was at 100%, it'd look like we're in an operating room. But I need to get a different diffuser for me, I think, because this is still a little bit harsh. Oh, I forgot to turn on my beauty light. Where is that button? I meant to turn this on a long time ago. See what a difference that makes? Just that little subtle thing. Of course, I could always do that. The things we think about, Jeff. The things we think about. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. I meant to turn that on at the beginning of the stream just to get that little bit of fill, but I forgot. So I've been ugly for you people this whole time. I don't think the light's the difference there. Do the Fender 59 Bassman Limited LTD amps need similar reliability mods as the one you recommend on the black panel reissues? Generally, the Bassman LTDs, as long as you change out the filter caps, the IC brand filter caps, they're really good amps. They don't have the heaters going to the board. At least the ones I've had in haven't had the heater connections going to the board. If you have one and it does, move them to the octal socket. So yeah, the same general concepts applies to the other reissues. But especially the 59 Bassman reissues that came with those Eminence Alnico speakers are just fantastic. Okay, I got a super chat from YN Junior BN. I can't pronounce your name. I'm sorry. I can't even begin to interpret that, but I appreciate it. He has a 75 AC30 that's much quieter and cleaner than it should be. Stephen Grosvenor could not find anything wrong with the circuit. Is it possible that the output transformer is faulty? Well, I would say that Stephen Grosvenor is going to know as much about those as I do. And I don't, off the top of my head, there's so many little variations during the 70s. Off the top of my head, I'm not quite sure which that one is. I believe that has reverb, and the reverb implementation can eat some gain, but it could be a faulty output transformer, but it's rare. It's much more likely to be either a voltage in the amp is lower or higher than it should be, or that a component has drifted, or that the wrong value component is somewhere, or just weak tubes. But without your amp in front of me, I can't tell you much more than that. And Steven, he's the dude, man. He literally wrote the book. So I would ask him if he wanted to You have to have another 75 AC30 to compare it to. And make sure you're running into some other speakers. You could just have some weak speakers. That happens. Sorry, I can't be more helpful. But some stuff I can remotely diagnose, but not everything. Let's see. People talking about Matt Wells as a tech. Okay. Yeah. Well, Jeff, ask Matt about the grounding. I don't ever want to second guess another tech in public like this. I won't. I tend not to do it in private. But if you and Matt can't find it, I'd be glad to do it. I'd be glad to talk to you on the phone, maybe help you find some things. I was thinking about this during the last intermission. The other thing it could be is a preamp tube, especially if it's a Russian preamp tube. A lot of them get leaks in the cathode to the heater. I know I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because it may not be the case, but I would assume that he or you have already. Hopefully, he's had the app since the hum started, and that the hum did not start as soon as he made that change. But it could be fine, and then all of a sudden, say a tongue saw or other Russian tube starts to act up. So definitely try some different preamp tubes in that. Raphael is using a JTM Studio 20 watt into a Scumbag speaker, which is 20 watts. Is that unsafe for the output transformer or the speaker? Yeah, it's unsafe, but it's a matter of degree. The Scumbag 20 watt is probably pretty conservatively rated. But yeah, in theory, you could blow your speaker, and if the speaker fails as an open, then yeah, you could damage your output transformer or your tubes. If you really like the sound, it may be worth it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a JTM Studio. It's not the world's best amp. I would tell you what I would do I would do for you if you're my client. If your amp came in and you're like, hey, I've got the Studio 20, and I really like the sound of the Scumbag speaker. Well, the output jack on a Marshall does not short like a Fender. So a Fender output jack shorts if it doesn't have a load. What you can have a tech do is put a 10 watt, 330 or 370, probably 330 ohm resistor across your output jack from tip to sleeve. Now that 330 ohm is going to be in parallel with whatever your speaker load is. So 8 ohm, nominally 8 ohm. That's not going to change the actual load of the speaker very much. Nominally, it would be like 7.9 ohm versus 8 ohm. So it's not going to really affect the sound of the speaker at all. But if that speaker were to fail as an open, then instead of having an 8 ohm load, you'd have a 330 ohm load. Now, while that's not ideal, and you wouldn't hear anything, there would be a load there, and that's fine. If the speaker were to fail as a short, then it would ground out, and that's fine because it's still a load. So that's the best thing for you to do if you're going to be doing this setup. Take it to Attack and say, I want a 10 watt, 330 ohm resistor across my output jack. And they'll either say absolutely no problem, they'll get it, or they'll look at you funny. But it's 2 solder joints and getting paid to do 10 minutes worth of work, or you can do it yourself if you have basic soldering skills. But that's the way to add a basic level of protection in case of a failed speaker. Don't, however, then say, well, I've got that resistor. I can use the amp without a speaker, and I'll just use it for recording and just go up. It's not the same thing as a dummy load. It's not there to be a dummy load. It's there to be a fail-safe. So if you're playing and all of a sudden your speaker dies and you don't hear anything, you won't also see smoke coming out of the amp. You'll be able to say, oh, whoa, the speaker failed. Let me turn it off. And then don't use it again until you get it checked out. That 330 ohm 10 watt speaker is not a dummy load. It is not for long use. It is just a safety. Let's see. Richard Clarks says, what would everyone consider the best effects solution for replacing all my pedals in a home situation? I don't need amp sims. I don't need to record. I just want the best possible sounding effects. Thanks. If money is not too big of an issue, I would first of all, I would go to Leon Todd's channel because he does a lot more of this kind of stuff than I do. But I know that the Fractal Axe-FX 3 is the Shiznit, but you have to buy that and a separate foot controller. But I know that they have some standalone floor units with a lot of modelers, and I know that they're going to be the best options out there for most people. If that is outside your budget, then yes, Line 6 has some stuff that most people find very, very good, and every day they get better. And it's, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with an HX Stomp or even the Helix system, but if money is not that big an issue, it's just want to save space, some of the floor units, the standalone floor units that Fractal makes would be the way to go, I would think. But check out Leon Todd's channel, and TODD, Leon as in Leon, and he has a lot of stuff like that featured, and he really goes into depth on that. And I think he'd be the better resource than me. Let's see. Thanks, Johnny Love. Appreciate that. Let's see. People talk about trainers, which is good. Thanks, Alex2112. Appreciate that. The big advantage of the Casino is that it doesn't have to be plugged in. That was just for Alex. Let's see. Well, thanks, Richard. I appreciate that you trust me. I just don't keep up with the effects world that much because it's ever changing, and so many of the things that people have raved about when I've tried them have been noisy. I don't like noise. I'm not a big fan of a lot of the companies out there that people tell me to be big fans of, but the Fractal stuff is really, really well done. They have really good converters. Hey, Mark Avery, he's got a Princeton reissue with hum that's worse when the reverb's turned up about 3. As far as he can ascertain, this is normal for this model. Yeah, I've shown this in a lot of my reissue videos. I think I've shown this specifically in a few. They miswire the driver's socket, which is V2 on a Princeton, and that introduces a lot of hum. So check out my various Fender reissue videos. It's in a playlist called Fender Reissues, and you'll see, if not a dedicated video on that, it has been addressed in a lot of them, and it really does make a difference. I most recently showed that in a Fender 64 hand-wired custom deluxe reverb review, where I show that exact issue, and I fixed that exact issue. So they're doing it not only in the standard reissues, but also the 64 custom hand-wired blah blah blah, pay us extra. Same stupid mistake. I don't get it. Why do springs versus rubber tubing impact pickup sound? Now, that's a fun question. They won't with every kind of pickup. And they win it with those Mojotone quiet coils, for instance, because those Mojotones and a lot of other noiseless pickups are epoxy potted, so that thing is inert. But a Telecaster bridge, a vintage one at least, is a very thin piece of stamped steel. This is not the big brass one. This is a thin bit of stamped steel. And the brass base plate of a Telecaster pickup is attached to this bit of steel with 3 screws, and the coil is very lightly potted. So if you have rubber insulation between this and the base plate of the pickup, that rubber is a dampener, and so this pickup does not vibrate very much. But if you replace that surgical tubing, that dampening material, with metal springs, there's still being held in place, but other than the mechanical tension of the spring, there's that light I was talking about, Jeff. There's not any dampening, and so this becomes much more lively. And every time you touch a string, there's an acoustic sound, and all those acoustic sounds are vibrations, and it makes the pickup more susceptible to that. You can go too far and it becomes microphonic and unusable, but you can also sometimes you find one that's magically microphonic. If you listen to live recordings of Roy Buchanan, the bridge pickup in his old 50s Tele, I think he called it Nancy, it was extremely microphonic to the point where you or I using it into Marshall probably would find it unusable, but he was using it into a Vibralex reverb, and he was a hell of a lot better than about 99% of the players on the planet. And he did magical things with that very lively sound. But it made a difference here with this very traditionally made pickup on this very traditional bridge. I needed the springs to get it just right. You'll hear that in the later video. I've got, a 57, 12 to 15 feet away from the speaker is not going to give you the best indication. Let's see. I like Cliff Jacks just fine. I like Cliff. I like Neutrik. I like Amphenol, and I like Switchcraft. Now, Amphenol, Neutrik, and Cliff are all pretty much interchangeable as far as the most popular style of jack people think of when they say a Cliff Jack. For some applications, I prefer a Switchcraft, but for other applications, the Cliff is much better. It depends on if I want to have a fixed ground or more flexibility in the ground connections. Do I like Stereotone in their version of the Dumble Overdrive Special? I've not had a Stereotone Overdrive Special. I had one of their steel string swingers here, whatever, stingers. Stereotones are well built with a maddeningly frustrating mismatch of parts. They'll have really good parts, and then for no reason a cheap switch or a cheap IEC jack where the plastic is fragile and breaks. I don't trust their transformers long term. They're very generic, cheaply, you can see corners are cut on the production of the transformers. The wiring jobs are fantastic. The implementation of the circuits are usually very, very good, and they can sound quite good, though I've had 3 where I've had to replace fuse holders, IEC jacks, and switches because those parts were cheap. Other parts are just great in them. I don't know what's under the orange plastic that says Stereotone Custom that they put on their capacitors, so I don't know if what's beneath there is a high-quality Japanese cap or some knockoff thing. I don't like it when companies pretend to make parts they don't make. Stereotone does not make capacitors, but they say that they do, and I find that kind of stuff disturbing. I think there are probably it's the same issues that we'd have with iPhones and the clothing we wear if we thought about what the employees are probably paid and what their lives are like. And that's not singling out Stereotone, but it's the same thing with a lot of the stuff that's made in Southeast Asia. We certainly pay mere pennies for what they would cost if they were made here, which means that someone is not getting those same pennies. That's a deeper subject, probably for a different channel, though I think about it a lot. But the Stereotones I've had in have sounded pretty good. I had a Marshall 2204 that they did, and they had a bus ground that was really poorly soldered. Just never got solder taken to it from the beginning. So they're not perfect, but for the price, you can fix them. I would recommend Freeman over Seriatone, but Freeman doesn't do a Dumble. I would recommend Fuchs over Seriatone for a Dumble thing, but the Fuchs costs quite a bit more. Though it's still not a terribly expensive overdrive special, but the Fuchs is better built and will last longer. I think it sounds better too. What would be a good 12-inch speaker for Silverface Champ? Fred, again, what sound are you trying to get? For some guys, it's going to be a G12C. Other guys, it's going to be a Texas, what do you call the Eminence Texas Heat. Other guys are going to want to have something a little bit darker. Other guys are going to have something more mid-range, more or less bass. If you just want the traditional Fender clean sound, get a Warehouse G12C and be happy. Josh Roberts, has anyone seen a power transformer leak a waxy-like substance? Yeah, a lot of transformers, especially in the 50s and 60s, were potted in wax, and it's really common, especially with Voxes, for that wax to leak out as they get hot. It's not necessarily a problem as long as it's just a little bit of a waxy substance. If there's a whole bunch of it, you may have an unpotted transformer. Hey SD, email me and be patient. I'm always behind on replying to emails. I get a couple hundred a day, and I don't have a couple hundred of me to do that. I will look for your thing though. Here's one of the things though. Like here, your SD, and in email you might be Scott Delmonico, or you might be something totally different. So I don't always have a correlation between a screen name and a person's name or an email address for me to look for. And I do get an awful lot of both intentional and unintentional spam. By unintentional, I mean, how do I make my Blues Junior sound like a Marshall? That's spam at this point. Other things are extended warranties for my car and stuff. Let's see. Dan Weston, if you're, oh yeah, in general, you want to have any transistors matched in a circuit like that, or at least within a spec, because old transistors can vary a lot. Match them as closely as possible. It's not the same thing as the bias balance. You may like the sound of a slight mismatch, but it should be slight. You want to know that they're going to be in the same ballpark at least. I know that in the factory, at Music Man's factory, back in the day, they weren't exactly matching them, but they were going to be more probably closer in tolerance, because they would have been brand new parts, and now the ones that are left over are 50 years old, 40, 50 years old. So, try to match them in the performance as much as possible. Oh, I don't think I've done a 5512. I did a 112. I'm pretty sure I did a follow-up, but if I didn't, it's just because I ran out of time on it. The Duo 112 was the one I had. Brad had a 5512. I had to replace all the electrolytic caps. I had to replace several of the driving transistors, including the little power transistors used for the reverb driver, and I got matched ones. I had to replace a number of resistors. I had to replace two pots, and I had to reflow all the tube sockets and remove an awful lot of flux from the old board. And I had to get a new reverb tank, which was difficult because I used a very obscure tank and it was mounted oddly. I got it working. I also had to get some new power tubes for it. That's not the amp's fault. Rivera makes good amps. This amp needed a lot of work because it never had any work done in 30 years, so it was time. But nothing in their design. Well, only one thing in their design I found questionable. They had one, was it 8 or 12 volt regulator that was not heat sinked, and I think that it should have been, but it was just looking a little cooked. It had not failed. The ones which had failed were heat sinked, but that happens. Transistors, even with heat sinks, the thermal paste dries up over time. It's an expected thing. It's a wear and tear every 30 years. So it had a happy ending, but it was an awful lot of work. And at the end of it, I personally found the amp not my cup of tea. The voicing options that Paul put in were not voicing options that I found particularly useful. And I know I'm not the world's best player, but I know what players tend to like. And just everything was just a little bit, I don't know. I didn't much care for it. Wholly subjective, though. I have played a 68 Custom Vibrolux. They have less headroom than the 65. If you want headroom, don't look at any of the 68 series. And that includes the new 68, what they call the Pro Reverb. It's not really a Pro Reverb. It's a 40-watt single channel out of a AB763. So it's kind of like a 40-watt version of half of a Pro Reverb, but it's not quite the real thing. If you want a whole bunch of headroom, you're going to want more headroom typically than a Vibrolux. Vibroluxes are intentionally low headroom because they have a output section that's capable of 40 watts, and they're going through about a 28-watt output transformer. So that's the sound of a Vibrolux is to get that squash. If you want headroom, you want to find yourself a actual Pro Reverb or a Bandmaster if you don't need reverb, or you want to get a Super Reverb. Those are the high headroom amps that are smaller than a Twin, though the Pro's not much smaller. The entire point of a Vibrolux is to have that squash that the output transformer gives it. And there's not a huge volume difference in a Vibrolux and a Deluxe, even though the Vibrolux has got 6L6s. It's 28 watts versus 22 in the Deluxe Reverb, which is one of the reasons I love a Vibrolux, a real Vibrolux Reverb. I would not consider the 68 to be the amp for that. But if you I don't know what your price range is, but if you want a lightweight Fenderish amp that's pretty light and around that wattage, then you need to check out the Suhr Bella, S-U-H-R Bella, B-E-L-L-A. And that would probably make you thrilled if it's in your price range. It costs more than the Fender reissues, but not a lot. Let's see. This, for some reason, the thing just keeps jumping. The chat keeps jumping on me. All right, we're back there. All right. All right, here's an interesting one for a couple reasons. Shaza, he's debating between getting a Friedman BE100 Deluxe and a Marshall JTM45, but I'm seeing the Marshalls are handmade in the UK, but diagonals are not used. How is the quality of Friedman parts? Well, the diagonals are used, but the diagonals haven't been made in the UK in forever. They're made in Vietnam now. They were made in Malta for a good long while. But I'll tell you a dirty secret. I've had the diagonals in the reissues from the 90s to now, and the more expensive ones are bad. They're not great transformers. They haven't used a great transformer since the 80s. I'm sorry, they just haven't. And handmade Marshall is not as good as a PCB Friedman. So Friedman's quality is much higher than Marshall's across the board. Marshall after 1983. But I find it odd that you're looking at the BE100 Deluxe versus the JTM45. Those are radically different amplifiers from each other. There's they're not competing with each other. They're very different things. That'd be like saying I'm thinking about getting either a Honda Civic or a Corvette. I mean, they're just okay. Take the price point totally out of it. They're very different objects. They're designed to do different things. So before you buy any of those, go play a bunch of them, because the guy who loves playing through his JT45 is going to think that the BE100 is just the worst thing ever, because it's just way too this and way too that, and vice versa. The guy who loves the BE100 is not going to like a JT45 typically, because it's not enough this and it's not enough that. It only does this one kind of thing. This is all subjective. There are players who would be quite happy to have both and know how to use each of them perfectly. But for a lot of us, if we're going to be spending that kind of money, that's going to be our main focus. That's my rig. And people who want a J1845 are looking for very different things than people who want a Friedman BE100. So play as many as you can and make informed decisions. But pretty much, no matter the sound you're going for, there is a Friedman which will give you that sound, or pretty damn close to that sound, at a much higher quality point than Marshall, often for the same or less money, especially when you're talking about the 20-watt Marshalls out there. Neil Stevenson says, on the Fender 65 twin reverb reissue PCB schematic R34 220K and C18.047, 47 nanofarad, are the reverses what is depicted on AB763 schematic? Do you consider this intentional or a mistake? All right. Once again, I don't remember specific part numbers on schematics very often. I mean, there's certain schematics I do, but I don't think of them as R that. I think of them as their role in the schematic. So let me see what those components are. I think of them as things like a limiting resistor or a mix resistor or stuff like that. I don't think of them as R67 or, You Sank My Battleship. So twin reverb reissue schematic. Come on, just open and stay open, okay? All right, so you're saying R34 and C18, so that's probably in the normal channel. Okay, yeah, they did that reversed. It's not going to be a huge difference. You're still going to get the same attenuation from R34 in combination with R35, whether it's before or after C18. I imagine it's just a more convenient layout for the PCB. That said, in general, I'll tell you why they probably did that. I think they probably did that for a smart reason. I'm thinking in terms of a board layout, because if they do it that way, I'd have to have the amp in front of me again. I forgot about this. If C18 is physically close to R35, that means that the trace that they bring from pin 6 all the way to C18 is DC. And DC is less subject to picking up noise from its environment, whereas if they had C18 over by V1B and then ran a long trace to R34 next to R35, that'd be a long AC signal path, and it could be susceptible to picking up noise. So that's probably what they did and why they did it. Let's see. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. You won't hear any difference. You're still mixing AC signals together, and you're still getting the attenuation through the mix resistors. And I'm sorry that I had to look it up, but I just don't think about part numbers the same. I think about what they're doing, and I'd forgotten that they did that in the Twin Reverb reissue. So thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I never pretend to know everything. There's a lot of stuff I have known that I need reminders about. Let's see. How the hell is that ringing when it's in Do Not Disturb? Oh, it's my daughter. She's on the exception list. I'll call her back. She's unlikely to be on fire. All right, my mom played a red 61 Gibson ES330 TDC through a 59 Super 1624T. She bought a Baldwin Pro 2 solid state, but what a turd. I've had to fix both of those amps. Well, Seth, take this in the spirit with which it's intended. Your mom sounds cooler than you. Do you still have the guitar? Does she still have the guitar? Hopefully she's still with us. I'd rather fix the Super than the Baldwin, though. Josh Roberts found an old organ that he's wanting to convert to a guitar amp. Well, better you than me. I don't like converting organ stuff into guitar amps. It's so much work, to get back to square one versus just buying a $60 chassis and doing it from scratch. Robot Songs. Scratch built 5F1 using scrounge parts, new scratch chassis, not using standard layout. 60 hertz hum the instant he turns it on before the tubes warm up. Well, that sounds like classic transformer interference. If you get 60 hertz, as soon as you turn it on before the tubes warm up, I think you might not have the transformers oriented the way you expect. But without having your amp in front of me, I can't guess. But that's one of the reasons I always do transformer tests before anything else. When building an amp from scratch, I'll connect the power transformer, and then I'll hook up but not install the output transformer and a speaker jack, and turn things until I get the quietest to be. Even if I know for sure that that's exactly where it should go, I verify before I lock it down. I think you need to go back to the beginning on that part of your build. Sorry, Robot Songs. Martin Reed says, big shout out to Colleen. Don't know if there are any ladies watching, but two. I personally am disappointed in how overwhelmingly middle-aged, seemingly white male my audience is. Nothing wrong with middle-aged white males. I happen to be one of them. But I try very hard to be interesting to all musicians. I don't want this to be I don't know. I just don't want this to get either a country club vibe or OK Boomer kind of place. I don't want to be an OK Boomer kind of thing. I'm not a boomer. I think you know what I mean. I hope in time maybe to attract a younger, more diverse audience, because music's awesome and guitars are awesome and amps are awesome and all this stuff. And if you were sitting there feeling, but I'm a middle-aged white guy. I love you too, man. It's not about not wanting certain people. It's about wanting everyone, not to have numbers or clicks or views or anything. That just because it makes for more interesting conversations. It's like I started this thing talking about how I like having people here from all over the world. I'd like to have more people here from all over everywhere, because it makes for it's a better reflection of life. And I know we're doing a real esoteric subject that even most musicians don't think about or care about. So it's going to be kind of limited, but I just don't want it to be like a cross-pollination between people who watch my channel also reading Cigar Aficionado or some bullshit like that. That's not who I want to be. Mike Chandler's got a modded AB165 Bassman that's insanely loud on just 2 on the volume. First of all, AB165s are insanely loud for 50 watts, and they have a ton of gain. and so you're only going to have clean headroom up to about 3. Beyond 3, it's going to start to break up. But someone might have put a linear audio taper pot in your amp, in which case it's going to get really loud really fast. It's also possible that someone changed the negative local feedback on V2, because if they increased it from 470K to 1 meg or something else, that's going to be nasty as hell. So I don't know what mods were done, but it can be normal. I'd have to hear it to tell you whether that's normal or that's more than that. Well, I will be opening that Prodigy up pretty soon, Brad, and I'll invite you to come watch. Actually, I'll tell you what, Brad. I may. You know more about this kind of stuff. If there's anything in there beyond just changing the power cable, we may have to do a collab video where I can send you a bunch of pictures of it, and you tell me what we need to do, and you can do a voiceover for your bit and tell me what to check, because you do more synth stuff than I do, and I'll do the fix, and I'll play the damn thing, and you tell me what to do. We'll talk. Listen. Oh, have they added spring reverb to the new one? I thought the new one was supposed to be what the old one was. I'll reserve judgment till I see it. You can integrate spring reverb into that circuit without compromising the signal path of the original circuit. It's just that historically Vox has never chosen to do that. They've always done it in ways that make it noisy or lower gain or weird in some way or introduce other problems. It's they have a bad history with reverb. Yeah, it's possible to do it. I mean, the custom series has got solid state reverb added very well, but they always seem to get tube reverb wrong. I'm not impressed by what I've heard about their new hand-wired series. And this time, we got everything right. We promise. As I've told various buyers the past 20 years that. See ya, Andy. All right. Well, we've been going now for 3 hours. Sorry, we've been going now for 3 hours. So I'm gonna go through here and catch any some chugs. I know how to chug. Let's see if there's any super. I know there's a couple super chats I haven't caught yet, and then we'll wrap this up for the day. Funny. Thanks, Richard Clark. Yeah, and Leon Todd is a great guy and a great channel for all the modeling stuff. I will get to some questions here that I've not had a chance to answer. You'll have to come back for the next one we do. Yellow Again makes fantastic Dumbo amps. Seth B just well is doing it. Yellow's doing it at next level stuff. So here's Two Rock and here's Yellow. He's getting everything just the way Alexander did. So I mean, I love Yellow. He's a friend of mine, and his work is exemplary. But you do pay for the privilege. So a lot of people are not going to be able to play that game. Kinmans are not exactly Kinman pickups are not built mechanically at all the same way a traditional single coil is. So you're not going to get the same. You're not going to get the same behavior with springs with a Kinman that you would with a traditional single coil. B, talking about my Strat, we're talking mounting to a piece of plastic which is dampened to the body. You're not going to get much difference between springs and rubber with the Strat pickup. I use surgical tubing for that versus the bridge on an old Tele. It's just a whole other thing. Another YouTube, yes, I take work from emails, but as I constantly am saying, I can't reply to all of them. I can't keep up with them. I'm trying. Yeah, I try to go through them, but I only have so much time. Crown Jewels Guitar says, how often do people get offended by my critiques on a product because they own said product these days? They own a matchless and a top hat amp, and I personally enjoy watching my videos and opinions on them. People love to get offended about everything. This is not some anti-PC thing. This is not some anti-woke thing. This is not a new trend. Is that no one ever likes to know that the emperor's naked. If you spend a lot of money on something, you want to like it. It's a confirmation bias, and it's been well known to psychiatry and psychology for 100 years. And to Shakespeare for 400 years. People, a lot of times it's interesting to me that the people who react negatively to these things are never actually reacting to what I say specifically so much as they just want to shut down any perceived criticism. So it's not, if I say, hey, this amp's pretty good, let's take a matchless. It's a pretty good amp overall. When it needs service, it's going to be expensive because all the wire leads are wrapped so many times around all the terminals, and it's built in layers, and it is biased too hot, and you can see that it's literally baking the tubes, and it's literally warping the plastic on the rear panel because it physically gets too hot, and tubes aren't going to last very long. So we need to cool down that bias. That is not a slam of matchless. That's saying, hey, it's 60 degrees and raining outside. That's just an objective measurement of reality. But people say, man, you don't know nothing about this. You're just a hack. You don't even play guitar. It just goes straight to the invective. And I don't want to hear anything negative about this thing that I love. Therefore, I will just attack the person saying something. And it's like, I'm glad you like your matchless. That's great. I think it can sound fantastic. There's no reason for it to run so hot that it literally burns itself up. I think that's a conversation worth having with an owner who cares about their amp, especially when it sounds better when it's biased at about 100 to 120% dissipation as opposed to 180 to 200% dissipation. It's like saying, you like your car? That's great. Have you ever considered having the right amount of air in your tires so they don't pop at speed? I have to take a lot of it with a grain of salt. There are occasional crazy people that I'll hide from the channel because, no one's got time for that shit. There was a guy yesterday who did like 30 replies in 5 minutes on one subject, and he was taking opposite sides of the same issue as he convinced himself that I was and was not an idiot. And I'm like, no one wants this person in their life, so he's gone. I keep stuff where people criticize me, but when people criticize are just insane, life is short. I'm only going through to catch some super chats. Thank you, Neil Stevenson. I appreciate that. Stump Underfoot. I've recommended Cerebella like 2 or 3 times in this. I'll recommend them again. Everything John does is really good. Thanks, Red Sox Century. Appreciate that. Yeah, I may consult with Six about the Moog if necessary. I really appreciate all the kind words from people, and it's amazing how many people have been here asking questions. And I wish I had more time, but like I said, I've got to make some time to catch up on emails and stuff. So we've been going 3 hours now. I think it's time for us to wrap this one up. We will do this again, and if I have not answered anyone's questions, and I'm sorry about that, please come back next time we do this. And the earlier in the chat you ask the question, the more likely I am to answer it, because I try to work through them as they come in. I only skip them if they've already been asked and answered, or if, frankly, sometimes there'll be some rude or either rude questions or questions or someone can just go to Google and get the answer. But I would love to answer all of them. It's just, there's only so much time in the day. I think you can all relate to that. So we will come back and do this again. Save your questions for next time, and we will get there. And what button do I push to do this? Oh, that's right, I do this one.